from female service members and combat veterans who support Mr. Hegseth's nomination. These women represent diverse viewpoints, from a retired colonel with over 25 years of service to an active duty Navy surface warfare commander to a senior airman. They support Mr. Hegseth and comment on his focus on merit, warfighting readiness, military training status, and the warrior ethos. So without objection, it will be entered into the record. And now I'm honored to recognize Senator Cotton for 7 minutes.
Mr. Hegseth, let's continue on this line of questioning about what's sometimes referred to as women in combat. I think that phrase is something of a misnomer. Many members of this committee have served in combat in the last 25 years, to include women and men. I'm sure all those men served with women, whether they were military police officers or they were pilots or whether they were intelligence analysts or medics or what have you. You served. I assume you served with women who were on the front lines as well. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And were those women anything other than skilled, brave, and honorable in their service?
They were some of the best soldiers I worked with, Senator.
So women have been serving in combat for a long time. Women have even been serving in combat units like infantry battalions for a long time in roles like medics or mechanics or what have you. So what we're talking about here specifically is women in ground combat roles in jobs like infantrymen or artillerymen or special forces. Until about 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. Under Secretary Panetta, those roles were opened up to women to serve in. Has President Trump indicated at all that he plans to rescind or alter that guidance?
You're correct to point out, Senator, that these are the decisions that the Commander-in-Chief will have the prerogative to make. He has not indicated to me that he has plans to change whether or not women would have access to these roles. However, I would point out, ensuring that standards are equal and high is of importance to him and great importance to me. Because in those ground combat roles, what is true is that the weight of the ruck on your back doesn't change. The weight of the 155 round that you have to carry doesn't change. The weight of the 240 Bravo machine gun you might have to carry doesn't change. And so whether it's a man or a woman, they have to meet the same high standards. And Senator, in any place where those things have been eroded or in courses, criteria have been changed in order to meet quotas, racial quotas or gender quotas, that is putting a focus on something other than readiness, standards, meritocracy, and lethality. So that's the kind of review I'm talking about, not whether women have access to ground combat.
Okay, so thank you. So you expect no change to that guidance, but as you point out, in these specific jobs, there are irreducible physical demands. We expect our intelligence analysts and our mechanics to be physically fit in the military, but it's different when you're in the infantry or the artillery. You just mentioned a few things. Let me point it out. An artillery shell weighs almost 100 pounds. An Abrams tank round weighs around 50 pounds. The M240 Bravo machine gun with its tripod weighs almost 50 pounds. The average weight of a full kit, ammo, water, commo, body armor for a soldier is over 100 pounds. Nothing you can do can change any of those things, right? That is physical reality.
Go ahead. Yes, Senator. And I would say the requirements to handle those things in a ground combat unit, as far as standards, can look different than those of a medic or a drone pilot. And so it's not that it has to be the same standard throughout. It's standards to maximize efficacy of that particular position.
Let me read a quote here from one Army officer. While it may be difficult for a 120-pound woman to lift or drag 250 pounds, the Army cannot artificially absolve women of that responsibility. It may still exist on the battlefield. The entire purpose of creating a gender-neutral test was to acknowledge the reality that each job has objective physical standards to which all soldiers should be held, regardless of gender. The intent was not to ensure that women and men will have an equal likelihood of meeting those standards. I assume, based on your testimony, you agree with that Army officer?
Absolutely. The standards need to be the same, and they need to be high, and they need to be set by the people closest to the problem set, closest to the understanding of what is required by that job. Commanders, commanding officers, and COCOMs and elsewhere who understand the reality of what they face, that's the feedback we should get. That's what should be enshrined and enforced. and no other set of political prerogatives. When I talk about removing politics, ideological or political prerogatives should contribute to those determinations, nothing other than the execution of the mission.
Thank you. For the record, that Army officer was Captain Kristen Greast, the Army's first female infantry officer and one of its first female Ranger School graduates. One final point, you said they need to be objective, gender neutral, and high. That's because the demands are, in fact, very high. The current physical fitness test for the Army has a minimum 2-mile run of 22 miles. Run. And I want the reporter to note that I'm putting run in air quotes, because 22 miles at 2 miles is not running. It may be jogging, it's probably walking fast. Let's move on. We've got a big, 22 minutes. We've got a big audience here. Many of them seem to be patriotic supporters of you, Mr. Hegseth. Some of them seem to be liberal critics of you. I would note that it's only the liberal critics that have disrupted this hearing. As was my custom during the Biden administration, I want to give you a chance to respond to what they said about you. I think the first one accused you of being a Christian Zionist. I'm not really sure why that is a bad thing. I'm a Christian. I'm a Zionist. Zionism is that the Jewish people deserve a homeland in the ancient Holy Land where they've lived since the dawn of history. Do you consider yourself a Christian Zionist?
Senator, I'm a Christian, and I robustly support the state of Israel and its existential defense, and the way America comes alongside them is a great ally.
Thank you. Because another protester, and I think this one was a member of Code Pink, which, by the way, is a Chinese Communist front group these days, said that you support Israel's war in Gaza. I support Israel's existential war in Gaza. I assume, like me and President Trump, you support that war as well, don't you?
Senator, I do. I support Israel destroying and killing every last member of Hamas.
And the third protester said something about 20 years of genocide. I assume that's our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Do you think our troops are committing genocide in Iraq and Afghanistan?
Senator, I do not. I think our troops, as you know, as so many in this committee know, did the best they could with what they have. We're not the outcomes, and tragically, the outcome we saw in Afghanistan under the Biden administration put a stain on that, but it doesn't put a stain on what those men and women did in uniform, as you know full well, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Hegseth.
Thank you, Senator Cotton.
Before I address the important work ahead at the DNI, please also let me make two observations about some of the accusations about Ms. Gabbard. First, I'm dismayed by the attacks on Ms. Gabbard's patriotism and her loyalty to our country. For instance, Hillary Clinton has smeared Ms. Gabbard, calling her an asset of a foreign nation. Let me remind everyone that Ms. Gabbard has served in our Army for more than 2 decades. She has multiple combat tours, and she still wears the uniform to this day. She has undergone 5 FBI background checks. I spent more than 2 hours last week reviewing the latest, putting eyes on more than 300 pages. It's clean as a whistle. It's fine that we have differences of opinions on policies and programs. I suspect some of my Republican colleagues might disagree with some of Mrs. Gabbard's votes in the House of Representatives. Just as I suspect that some of my Democratic colleagues might criticize Ms. Gabbard's statements and actions since she saw the light and left the Democratic Party. But I sincerely hope that no one today will impugn Ms. Gabbard's patriotism and integrity. Second, I can only laugh at some critics who say that Ms. Gabbard has unconventional views. No doubt she has some unconventional views, like her criticism of Barack Obama's regime change interventions in Egypt and Libya. But guess what? I opposed the disastrous interventions in Egypt and Libya as well. Mubarak was a longtime American partner, and Egypt was a linchpin of our security system in the Middle East. Gaddafi had been scared straight after we toppled the Taliban and Saddam Hussein. He turned over his weapons of mass destruction and cooperated against terrorists. In return, we had lifted sanctions and reestablished diplomatic ties. But President Obama intervened to topple both regimes. And what came next? The Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and dangerous chaos in Libya to this day. No one ever mistook Mubarak or Gaddafi as the little sisters of the poor. But let's not kid ourselves. The world is a dangerous place, not a church picnic. Ms. Gabbard understands this, which is why she also saw the problem with regime change interventions in these places.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. From my work on the Intelligence Committee over the last 10 years and now as chairman, I can tell you this issue is a critical concern to me. Our national labs are where we develop some of the scientific research and capabilities that are the envy of the world, but they lack security measures. And I can say that it's not just me, it's many other members of the Intelligence Committee. 5 members are on this committee. There's a reason why we passed legislation last year unanimously that would have stopped scientists from China and Russia and even Iran and North Korea and Cuba from being in our labs. Mr. Gabbard, do you know how many Chinese and Russian scientists were in our labs in the last fiscal year for which we have data?
Yeah, if I've seen your past testimony, I think the number's around 8,000.
8,000? Out of a total of how many, do you know?
Well, total lab employees are probably...
No, total foreign visitors.
Oh, I'm not certain about that.
40,000. So 1 out of every 5 foreign scientists in an American national lab is Chinese or Russian. Do you know how many American scientists get to go to equivalent sites in China and Russia? I do. Do you know, Mr.?
I think it's less.
If I put the over-under at 0.5, would you bet the over or the under?
Maybe even under.
Ms. Puglisi, how many American scientists get to go to Russia, the equivalent sites in Russia and China?
Right, Senator, I currently don't have that number. However, I think that's a point that that I've made before this committee and others, is that it's that reciprocity. I mean, true collaboration comes from transparency, reciprocity, and that's one of the things that we are not.
I couldn't agree more. Ms. Richmond, do you think 1 out of every 5 foreign scientists at a Chinese or Russian equivalent site is American?
I don't know those numbers, I'm sorry.
Yeah, there's zero reciprocity on this issue. Why would we allow Chinese and Russian scientists into our national labs, to say nothing of Iranians and Cubans and North Koreans, when they don't allow our scientists there? That we've told the directors of these labs for a long time in the Intelligence Committee that if they do not get a hold of this problem, then the Congress will solve it for them. And the legislation that we introduced and passed with the Intelligence Committee last year, although it didn't get passed in law, will be brought back up this year. And I'm going to champion that on this committee and on the Intelligence Committee, because we have to put an end to this threat. There's a lot of great people working in the Department of Energy, to include at our labs and at the Office of Intelligence and Counterintelligence, one of the very best of our small intelligence offices around the government. But there are too many people who have this open science mindset, this naive ideological commitment that we have to allow these foreign adversary scientists into our labs no matter what the risk. Mr. Barr, who has the final word on allowing such a foreign visitor to visit his or her lab?
So the order is flexible on who has the authority. Previously, when we instituted it, when I was undersecretary, it was required to be up at my level. And we were able to squash a lot of the Thousand Talents programs. We found many people working for China, including on joint nuclear weapons work. That's a pretty stunning comment I just gave that we found at one of the labs. I believe I was told in my conversations with DOE recently is that a lot of that's been delegated down to the individual lab level, and I'm not exactly certain.
And again, we have great people working in our individual labs, but by and large, the directors of these places tend to come from a scientific background. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
They're not coming from the intelligence community. They're not coming from law enforcement. If a foreign national is excluded from one lab, is he therefore excluded from every other lab?
I'm not certain how it's currently being executed.
I think the answer is no.
Yeah.
If one foreign lab director, or if one of our lab directors says, no, this guy from Russia is too dangerous a risk and can't be here,
he can just turn around and try to go to one of the other labs as well. Is it fair to say that sometimes there's a little bit of competition between these labs for money or prestige or talent?
Senator, during one of my many times of uncovering things with intelligence, counterintelligence at the labs, we found a Chinese national who had been hired to one of the DOE labs, and then they used that to shift to NIST in Colorado and use the impromptu of having been hired at a DOE national lab to join a very important quantum effort at NIST. And as soon as we found that out, we had to reach out to Commerce very quickly and point out that we were sorry that this person had gotten that role, and basically we allowed them to end up at another lab.
Thank you. I just want to thank the chairman for having this hearing. This is not something that we discuss much in a public setting. We've examined it very closely for years on the Intelligence Committee, but it is a grave national security threat. It's a threat to our prosperity as well, because so much of these technologies end up getting commercialized. And to be clear, what we're talking about here, again, is foreign nationals. There's been a lot of testimony or a lot of statements from members and the witnesses about the history throughout American life of foreign-born naturalized scientists. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about someone who's raised their hand and taken the oath of affirmation to become a citizen or even a legal permanent resident. We're talking about foreign nationals coming to our lab. This is a grave threat, and we can't allow it to continue.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Reed. Senator Cotton.
Mr. Feinberg, you've already mentioned in your opening remarks and your exchange with Senator Wicker the importance of revitalizing our defense industry. One important department has is the defense production going back decades, but unfortunately struggled to effectively use the Defense Production Act. The previous administration used it for non-critical needs like so-called green energy. What are your thoughts on how we could reform the Defense Production Act and use it more effectively to jumpstart our defense industry?
Yes, Senator, thank you. It's a great tool for us. I think we have to combine some of our top people at the Pentagon with private sector capability and look at the kind of things that we really need with urgency, speed, of course, a lot of due diligence, but not crushing due diligence, which takes us 6 months, a year and a half, which often happens in those kind of programs. Got to go faster, got to realize the threat, got to put the right people who can go faster.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I agree. Especially when you get to the subcomponent level in industry, there's a lot of challenges with supply, and the Defense Production Act was passed decades ago out of recognition that when we're in a crisis, as I think we face now around the world, the defense industry simply has to come first when it comes to certain critical components or supply chain challenges. You identified China as the most serious threat we face, certainly the most serious long-term threat we face. I completely agree with that. I'm curious about your thoughts on what are the key acquisition programs underway right now or that might soon be underway that you think we would need in a conflict in the Western Pacific? Obviously, a conflict most likely to happen if Communist China decided to go for the jugular in Taiwan.
Yeah, I mean, clearly we need to develop autonomy. Autonomy in significant numbers with a centralized command, effectively brain. And we have to make the right decision on whether we need to build a next generation aircraft or we can rely on autonomy. Of course, we got to improve our shipbuilding. China's very strong there. Our nuclear capabilities are old. We have to upgrade them. And we have to develop hypersonics. We can't allow the Chinese to be faster than us, both in their weaponry and aircraft, and so many more, Senator.
Yeah, thank you. I agree on all of those. One question or issue that you mentioned in there is whether we have a manned sixth-generation fighter. I know that you haven't been on the job yet. You haven't gotten all the briefings that we've had on the committee. Do you have any preliminary thoughts on the need for a manned fighter?
Well, it's a controversial issue, Senator. I know there's views on both sides. I want to get in there, if I'm fortunate enough to be confirmed, look at all the classified information And ultimately, that decision could be made by the secretary or the president even, and see if I can add some value to it.
Sure. As we discussed, I hope that we can move along promptly and you can get the same information the committee has. It's a decision that needs to be made soon, but it's not imminent in a matter of days. I mean, there are several weeks left, I believe, before the decision needs to be made. What about any thoughts on munitions? Obviously, munitions are complicated these days, but they're still not a stealth bomber. They're not an aircraft carrier. We do need to increase basic rates of production on these. It's not reinventing the wheel. It's just making more of the same stuff. Any thoughts on how we can accelerate production rates in private industry?
It's a tough problem. A lot of times in ammunition, you need ammunition machines effectively to help build it, and those are in short supply. You know, my hope is, if I am confirmed, that for each of these shortages, get in there, look at the specific facts, go over it in detail, understand the weaknesses, and come up with a detailed operating plan. And my humble opinion, often in the past, maybe some of the senior civilian leadership in the Pentagon, maybe not as deep into the detail of these. Every operating entity has all sorts of detail you got to get into. So I don't know yet, but I think there's a lot of companies we can attract to help us with this problem. It's not rocket science, munitions, and there is an ability to expand.
Okay. Thank you, and thanks to your family, your very large extended family, and their record of service to our nation in the military and in law enforcement, and also thanks to your father, who's watching today, part of the greatest generation along with your uncles. It's a great American story that reflects the story of so many other of our military families.
Thank you for your service, Senator. I appreciate it.
Mr. Phelan, greetings. I want to continue along the line of questions that Senator Fisher had about munitions. You mentioned increasing capacity, building new facilities, and I think that's going to be important in some cases. However, there's also cases in which the Navy has consistently underfunded munitions production, and therefore we have excess capacity that isn't being fully used. That's the case, for instance, outside Camden in Arkansas, the Highland Industrial Park, where we build many of the munitions the Navy uses, like the Standard Missile 3 and the Standard Missile 6. What are your thoughts on fully funding those programs so we can get up to full capacity in the facilities that we have now for the Navy, for the other services, as well as for foreign partners?
Thank you for the question, Senator Cotton. I know it's an issue important to you. Appreciated the time we got to spend in your office. If confirmed, I will look into that. I think it's crazy to not have facilities running at full capacity. So if you're under capacity, it just raises expense in effect. It's one of the things I've noticed when I've looked at all these different weapons programs. It seems like the next missile costs more than the first missile, so you have no economies of scale. That is a prescription for bankruptcy. I don't understand how the second and third one is not less than the first one. And that's something, if confirmed, we intend to dig into very hard and understand. And I do think having more flexible manufacturing when you have excess capacity in plants that are already making munitions, we should absolutely make sure that we're taking advantage of that capacity.
Thank you. I do agree. That's probably the quickest and easiest way to address some of these shortfalls. As I said, we're going to need more manufacturing capacity, but making sure that current lines that have excess capacity are fully used is probably the quickest way we can get there. I can assure you that we have lots of people in South Arkansas who are eager to do that work. One other point I'd like to make is just to encourage you, once confirmed, to work with our State Department on foreign military sales. That's another way to send the demand signal to our industry, not just our services, but our friends in Europe and the Middle East and East Asia, cutting through the red tape and allowing them to buy the weapons that we're providing here to provide for their common defense.
If confirmed, I will agree with you.
Thank you. Senator Fisher also mentioned the sea-launched cruise missile, nuclear, also occasionally known as SLICM-N. I'm glad to hear you're committed to carrying out the law there. I think it's an important part of our deterrent. Another critical part of our deterrent is the Columbia-class submarine. It's one of the three legs of our nuclear triad. It's the most survivable leg because they're almost undetectable. That guarantees a second strike capability against Russia and against China in particular as China continues its breakneck nuclear buildup. Are you committed to continuing the Navy's highest priority on the Columbia-class submarine?
Thank you for the question, Senator Cotton. Yes, the nuclear triad, and in particular the Columbia-class submarine is critical to the triad and its deterrence, and we have to absolutely make sure we get that done.
Thank you. I'm very glad to hear that. Some people up here in Congress need to hear it as well. The Surface Navy has not been in a good place for a long time. I've made this case for many years now. 2 destroyers years ago were wrecked in the Pacific. The Bonhomme Richard caught fire. Commanders were found to be overburdened by administrative tasks and under-focused on warfighting. You had a friendly fire incident with the Gettysburg in the Red Sea in December of '24, and just recently a collision between the Truman and a merchant ship in the Suez Canal. I raised this for the last administration. It didn't seem like we made much progress on it. What are your thoughts on how we can get the Surface Navy in particular back up to the standards of leadership and execution that the nation expects?
Thank you for the question. I did read the study that you helped commission in 2021, and I think one of the captains mentioned compliance-centered warfare versus warfighter-centered warfare. This comes back to the kind of culture issues that I mentioned, which is I think that we've lost some of the adaptability, some of the accountability, some of making sure that people are doing their jobs and those who are being promoted are the right ones. And so I think there's also a lot of pressure on these captains and these commanders today because we're undermanned, and that puts pressure on the entire force, which is very difficult. So I think this comes back to recruiting. I think it comes back to retention. I think it's making sure that we promote the best. These people are operating huge assets that are very, very valuable. And so we need to make sure they have the skills and that they have the requisite capabilities around them to execute on this. So if confirmed, I will focus on this relentlessly, and I would hope that we would not have any more issues like that at all.
Thank you. Senator King.
Thank you very much. Senator Cotton.
Mr. Colby, welcome. Let's talk about the threat of a nuclear Iran. I have some concerns about what you've said in the past, namely that if we had to choose between hoping to contain a nuclear Iran and preventing Iran with military force from getting nukes, that we should tolerate a nuclear Iran and try to contain it. For instance, you've written that, quote, containing a nuclear Iran is eminently plausible and practical objective. You've approvingly cited the view that, quote, the only thing worse than the prospect of an Iran armed with nuclear weapons would be the consequences of using force to try to stop them. That's certainly not my view, but more important, it's not President Trump's policy. He has said for more than a decade that Iran cannot be allowed to get nuclear weapons. He declared in a national security presidential memorandum last month that a nuclear Iran, quote, poses an existential danger to the United States and can never be allowed to acquire or develop nuclear weapons. In your written answers to the committee's advanced questions, you now seem to echo President Trump's policy. You wrote, for example, the United States should deny Iran from gaining a nuclear weapon. So it seems that we all agree that Iran cannot be allowed to get nukes. The question is how to stop them. Let me be clear up front on a couple points. First, I think everyone would welcome a diplomatic deal in which Iran completely turns over its nuclear program, as Libya did in 2003. And second, I don't think anyone here advocates for invading and occupying Iran for a decade to stop its nuclear program. I certainly don't. But here's the question. Diplomacy fails. Iran is racing to a bomb. We have a choice. Tolerate a nuclear Iran and hope to contain it. Use military force to stop Iran from going nuclear. In that case, will you commit to providing the President with credible, realistic military options to stop Iran from going nuclear?
I do commit to that, Senator.
And to be more precise, those credible and realistic options are more than simply saying we can give Israel some bombs and they can take care of it.
Yes, I agree with you, Senator.
It's well known that Israel lacks certain military capabilities that we have, such as aerial refueling tankers and heavy bombers with deep penetrating ordnance. Do you believe that at least one option for the President to consider how to stop Iran from going nuclear should be to use our tankers and our bombers, whether in tandem with Israel or in the lead?
Senator, I wouldn't want to get ahead of the president on specific decisions, but I think those are the kinds of things that should be absolutely part of this the discussion. And if I were confirmed, those would certainly be the kinds of things that I would raise for the consideration of the Secretary and ultimately the president.
Thank you. And to be clear about why this is so important to us, to the United States, not just to Israel or our Arab friends, why President Trump says a nuclear Iran is an existential danger to us. You agree that it's an existential danger, not just a severe danger, as you said in response to Senator Gillibrand, or a significant one, as you said in your written answers.
Yes, a nuclear armed Iran, especially, Senator, given that they, as we've discussed, that they've looked into, or we know they've worked on ICBM range capabilities and other kinds of capabilities that would pose an existential danger to the United States.
So they have a space launch program, which is flimsy cover for an intercontinental missile program that could be used to hit us here in Washington, in Little Rock, or elsewhere in the continental United States. It is an immediate threat to Israel and our Arab friends, but it is a threat in the not-too-distant future, probably in just a couple of years, to the United States.
Senator, I don't have access to the intelligence information, but that sounds very consistent to me.
And do you agree that providing President Trump with those credible military options is actually one way to increase leverage to have an airtight diplomatic deal?
Yes, I do agree.
That a lack of military options would make it harder to get a deal?
I do. I think.
Thank you. I want to turn briefly to Taiwan. You have said here today and in your past writings that Taiwan is a critical matter for us. You wrote in 2016 that you thought we should give explicit security guarantees to Taiwan, reversing a decades-old policy of strategic ambiguity. You opined in the same way in 2020 in response to a hearing in the House of Representatives. Over the past couple of years, you've started to say, as Senator Wicker pointed out earlier, that Taiwan is a vital interest, but it's not existential interest to us, or it's not essential to us. It seems that you have changed your thoughts somewhat in the last couple of years. That is not, I suspect, because of Taiwan's defense spending, which, though still inadequate, I agree, has been trending upward for 7 straight years. So could you explain to us why in the last few years your views seem to have softened somewhat about the defense of Taiwan?
Absolutely, Senator. I've always said that Taiwan is very important to the United States, but as you said, it's not an existential interest. It's very important. The core American interest is in denying China regional hegemony. What's changed, Senator, as we discussed, is the dramatic deterioration of the military balance. So if I could use the Churchill example again, it's different to engage in a futile and overly costly effort that would destroy our military. And I know you've written very eloquently about this danger in your recent book. And the other point that I would say, Senator, is that I believe that we actually have implicitly our relationship and our commitment to Taiwan is largely implicit or indirect or customary. We actually have specified our commitment through things like the designation of Taiwan as the pacing scenario for the department. So my view that the combination of the greater threat from China and the lack of preparedness on our part, I have a different assessment with respect, Senator, about Taiwan's efforts. I think actually as a proportion of GDP, it's well below 3%. I agree with President Trump that they should be more like 10%, or at least something in that ballpark, really focused on their defense. So we need to properly incentivize them. So together, that means that my focus has been, again, with the shooting the flare metaphor I used earlier, Senator, to get Taiwan motivated, to avoid precipitating a conflict that is not necessary with Beijing, and giving us time and space to be able to try to rectify this problem, because that is my goal, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Cotton.
General Friedrichs, I'd like to continue with the answer you just gave to Senator Shaheen about our dependence on other countries for drugs and precursors, specifically communist China. The United States relies heavily on communist China for basic drugs and so-called APIs, active pharmaceutical ingredients. Providers obviously need this not just in the civilian world, but in the military world, especially to treat combat casualties. China, for instance, has 80% of the global supply chain of antibiotics. How could communist China use this dependence of ours to its advantage if there were a major conflict in the Pacific?
Thank you very much, Senator Cotton. And I think we've seen examples of this with rare minerals and other things that China largely controls the supply chain for, in that they will choose to titrate that supply chain based on their satisfaction or dissatisfaction with those trying to purchase those items. I had the great privilege in my last role of working with India, the EU, Japan, and Korea on a consortium in which we began to identify ways to leverage new technologies to change and to broaden our supply chains. And I encourage this committee to direct the Department of Defense, in partnership with the Department of Health and Human Services, to continue exploring those options. What we found was, in many cases, as in the case of antibiotics that are based on penicillin, the Japanese have already made a tremendous investment in the ability to produce those APIs within Japan. We should be partnering with them and creating an environment in which at least the DoD and the VA purchase from Japan to help sustain that production base and ensure that we have the access that we need. There are many more examples. I touched on some of them in my written statement, but there are ways to mitigate this.
And your answer to Senator Shaheen said that Congress should push the Department of Defense to catalog all of these dependencies. It sounds like you're saying that we also need to push to eliminate or at least significantly curtail these dependencies as well. Is that right?
Absolutely.
And you mentioned 4 different sourcing options, South Korea, Japan, the EU, and India. Those first 3 are advanced industrial democracies just like ours. If they can produce these items like acetaminophen or ibuprofen or penicillin at a reasonable cost, surely the United States could do so as well, right?
I believe that is the case, and what we found is that, particularly in these countries, they've created an environment in which it was financially possible for companies to produce these items within their country. We have not done that here in the United States, but a thoughtful industrial policy that was focused on resilience and national security, as well as economic security and health security, could do that for us as well.
It's fair to say that between the 2 of them, the Department of Defense and the Department of Veterans Affairs sure does have a lot of purchasing power to create a domestic market for the production of these fairly basic and long-standing medicines, right?
Absolutely. About 8% of the market, and it gets back to Senator Shaheen's point about continuing resolutions and predictability. If companies know that they have a predictable demand signal, they'll build to it. If they have an episodic or random demand signal, they'll let somebody else deal with that.
General Robb, I've noticed you nodding your head vigorously, so please get off your chest everything you wanted to add to General Friedrich's answers.
Yes, I also, and I know, I'm sure you're aware, and this has been in the direction from questions asked by our Congress. The Center for Health Services Research at the Uniformed Services University has been tasked with, along with the Defense Logistics Agency, to catalog and specifically look at what and define the problem. What is the Department of Defense's reliance on the medicines that we have talked about that are primarily sourced from China and from India, and then which would then help what I would call inform the decisions way ahead of whether you, what I call it, ally shore, or near shore or onshore, as Dr. Friedrich discussed in looking at a way forward. But they're creating that, what's the data to drive the decision and the investment. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen, both for your answers. It's long been the case that the Department of Defense, acting at congressional direction, has mandated the domestic purchase of many uniform items. So I think surely we should make sure that our troops have the medicines they need to stay healthy or to recover as needed.
Thank you, Senator Cotton.
As I mentioned in my opening remarks, the annual threat assessment for the first time lists cartels and traffickers as the very first threat. Director Patel, I'm pleased to say that the FBI's Little Rock field office has been doing its part in addressing this threat. The field office, along with other federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies, have arrested nearly 300 immigrants in my state in 2025 so far. Could you provide some color about the nature of the threat these illegal immigrants have posed, not just to Arkansas, but our nation, perhaps including some of the details of the horrific offenses they've committed against the American people?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Vice Chairman.
The witness will suspend. So that protester was a code pink lunatic saying the greatest threat to world peace is funding Israel, I will observe, for the benefit of the audience here and on television, that Code Pink is funded by Communist China as well, which simply illustrates, speak up now if you want to be removed as well, whoever's saying that. If anyone else would like to join them, speak now, please, so we don't have any more disruptions. As I was saying, the fact that Communist China funds Code Pink, which interrupts a hearing like this about Israel, simply illustrate Director Gabbard's point that China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and other American adversaries are working in concert to a greater degree than they ever have before. Director Patel, back to my question, could you give us some color about the threat that illegal migrants have posed, not only to my state, which has resulted in nearly 300 arrests in 2025, but also to the nation at large?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, and members of the committee. I appreciate the time to address you all. Specifically to Arkansas, Senator, the priorities at the FBI, which I identified during my confirmation hearing and since, is attacking violent crime along with national security. And every single state in this country is a border state. Arkansas is no exception. Allow me to highlight the work of the men and women in the FBI and state and local law enforcement in the state of Arkansas. Since February 5th alone, we've had 220 illegal immigrants arrested on charges varying from violent offenses, weapons offenses, narcotics offenses, and serious violent felonies. 253 separate individuals have been charged related to those offenses. And here's something I want the American people to hear about narcotics and countering narcotics. Thousands of pounds of narcotics were seized in these 3 weeks in the state of Arkansas. Thousands, worth tens of millions of dollars. Everything from fentanyl to meth to cocaine to heroin to marijuana and more. And also including manufactured drugs. The FBI does have the biggest footprint in Arkansas, but we could not achieve this mission without our state and local law enforcement partners, which has been one of the priorities since I took the helm at the FBI. They provide the greatest ground level intelligence to conduct these operations in Arkansas and in every single state across the union. Since February 5th, we've assisted with the arrest of hundreds of criminals and illegals throughout your state. And that was just a 3-week operation. Prior to that, Senator, there was a bust of 17 federal indictments relating to a meth lab in the state of Arkansas in the southwest corner of your state. All of those individuals are now facing prosecution for hundreds of pounds of illegal opioids, guns, and other illicit material. So we will continue to do that work. We will work it 7 days a week, 365 days a year, not just in your state, Mr. Chairman, but in every state.
Thank you, Director Patel. As Director Gabbard highlighted from the annual threat report, Director Ratcliffe, many, if not most, of the chemical precursors for deadly fentanyl produced by Mexican drug cartels originates in China. China, of course, is a techno-totalitarian police state. They have technology to monitor their own people that Soviet Russia could have only imagined. Is there any reason, Director Ratcliffe, to believe that China could not monitor and crack down on this flow of chemical precursors to Mexico if it chose to do so?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. No, there's nothing that prevent China, the People's Republic of China, from cracking down on fentanyl precursors. As you well know, Senator, one of the reasons that they don't is that there are more than 600 PRC-related companies that produce those precursor chemicals in an industry that generates $1.5 trillion. That is one of the reasons that we see the Chinese efforts to affect the fentanyl precursors are really limited in nature and intermittent in nature, and not a dedicated effort to enforce their own laws and regulations to crack down on this.
Thank you, Director Ratcliffe. I have many more questions I could ask, but I'm going to try to lead by example and stay within the 5-minute limit for the benefit of senators. I remind everyone There is a vote scheduled at noon. I hope to finish the open portion of this hearing before that vote closes, after which time we'll move to the closed portion. The Vice Chairman. Good morning. Welcome to the Senate Intelligence Committee Annual Worldwide Threats hearing. I'd like to begin by welcoming our esteemed panel of witnesses, the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, the CIA Director, John Ratcliffe, the FBI Director, Kash Patel, the Director of the National Security Agency and Commander of U.S. Cyber Command, General Tim Hawk, and the Defense Intelligence Agency Director, Lieutenant General Jeffrey Cruz. Thank you all for your appearance. Thank you for your leadership. I also want to recognize the hard work and dedication of the thousands of men and women in our intelligence community whom you're here to represent today. Their successes are seldom celebrated. Their accomplishments are often unseen. But our nation is grateful to each one for the vital work they do to keep our nation safe, prosperous, and free. Our annual Worldwide Threats hearing allows for the American people to receive an unvarnished and unbiased account of the real and present dangers that our nation faces. As we will hear from our witnesses, many of the threats we face are truly existential. Communist China is actively working to replace the United States as the world's dominant superpower. China uses coercive military, economic, and influence operations, short of war, to shape a world favorable to its interests and hostile to ours. These methods include the biggest peacetime military buildup in history, rapidly expanding its nuclear forces, providing critical assistance to help Russia withstand U.S. sanctions, obscuring its role in accelerating the spread of COVID-19 beyond Wuhan, turning a blind eye to Chinese companies that enable the production of fentanyl flooding into the United States, and putting space weapons on orbit, among other tactics. Iran, despite setbacks inflicted on its so-called axis of resistance by Israel over the last year, still aims to destroy what it calls the little Satan, the state of Israel, and what it calls the great Satan, the United States. It continues to arm Yemeni rebels to attack global shipping, though these outlaws have suffered terrible losses over the last 2 weeks thanks to decisive action by President Trump and our brave troops. I commend the President, Mike Waltz, Pete Hegseth, and his entire national security team for these actions. Iran also continues its decades-long effort to develop surrogate networks inside the United States to threaten U.S. citizens. Furthermore, Iran's nuclear program continues apace. It's actively developing multiple space launch vehicles, which are little more than flimsy cover for an intercontinental ballistic missile program that could hit the United States in a matter of years. But all this will soon come to an end. The supreme leader of Iran now faces a stark choice, thanks to President Trump. The supreme leader can fully dismantle his nuclear program, or he can have it dismantled for him. Finally, today's report also acknowledges that illicit drug production endangers the health and safety of millions of Americans. For the first time, the annual threat assessment lists foreign illicit drug actors as the very first threat to our country. As the report highlights, Mexican-based cartels using precursors produced in China continue to smuggle fentanyl and synthetic opioids into the United States. Last year alone, these deadly drugs tragically killed more than 52,000 Americans, more than the number killed in attacks by foreign terrorists or foreign nations. Given these threats, we have to ask, are our intelligence agencies well postured against these threats? I'm afraid the answer is no, at least not yet. As the world became more dangerous in recent years, our intelligence agencies got more politicized, more bureaucratic, and more focused on promulgating opinions rather than gathering facts. As a result of these misplaced priorities, we've been caught off guard and left in the dark too often. I know that all of you agree that the core mission of the intelligence community is to steal our adversaries' secrets and convey them to policymakers to protect the United States. At the same time, it's not the role of intelligence agencies to make policy, to justify presidential action, or to operate like other federal agencies. After years of drift, the intelligence community must recommit to its core mission of collecting clandestine intelligence from adversaries whose main objective is to destroy our nation and our way of life. The reason is not that our intelligence community lacks dedicated patriots who show up to work every day to protect the American people. On the contrary, it has an abundance of them. The reasons are a misuse of resources, bureaucratic bloat, a default to play it safe, and a past administration that prioritized social engineering over espionage. Coupled with recent failures, the finding in today's Worldwide Threat Report should be a wake-up call to all of us to get our house in order. The status quo is proving inadequate to provide the President and Congress with the intelligence needed to protect the American people. As more storms gather, America's intelligence capabilities require urgent reform and revitalization. As the chairman of this committee, I look forward to working with each of you to strengthen America's intelligence edge and refocus our intelligence community on its core mission, stealing secrets. The American people deserve nothing less. We've assembled an impressive team to get this done, and I look forward to hearing your comments. Now I recognize the Vice Chairman for opening remarks.
Cotton, you are recognized.
General Whiting, I want to return to Senator Reed's line of questioning about commercial space launch and any kind of risk it might pose us. You called the commercial space industry a, quote, massive advantage. I assume you're saying it's a massive advantage against our chief adversaries in this domain, China and Russia?
That's correct, Senator.
Can you give us a sense of scale of how big the advantage? Well, first off, commercial space launch. To be precise here, we're talking about ULA, the United Launch Alliance, and SpaceX, correct?
That has been the providers, and now Blue Origin has recently demonstrated New Glenn. Yes, sir.
So can you give us a sense of scale of just how massive an advantage we have over, say, China because of ULA and SpaceX?
Yes, Senator. And while I don't have the numbers, I can qualitatively describe those. If you go back probably 5 to 10 years, the number of launches we were executing compared to those in China or Russia looked very similar. But over time, the U.S. has massively increased the number of launches, and that equates to what we call mass to orbit. So that means we're able to put more satellites on orbit, whether for commercial or government purposes, and those are getting cheaper and cheaper per pound, which also gives us more opportunities to leverage space for various missions.
So you said 5 to 10 years ago we had roughly equal space launch capacity as China and Russia, but now we've substantially exceeded them, right?
Correct. Yes, Senator.
And what's been the driver over the last 5 to 10 years of that substantial increase? Is it ULA or is it SpaceX?
Predominantly SpaceX, yes, sir.
So if it wasn't for SpaceX, we might be in a position where we still are at near equivalence to China and Russia in space launch.
They certainly have been innovative and rapidly changed that market. Yes, sir.
Thank you. General Cotton, you've testified in the past, as have your predecessors, that China has undertaken a breathtaking buildup of its nuclear arsenal. It used to have what is called minimal deterrence, a nuclear arsenal just sufficient for a second strike. Obviously now it's moving on to first strike capabilities, whatever its rhetoric is. I think the department estimates that it's doubled its nuclear arsenal since Xi Jinping took power. It projects it to double again by the end of this decade and maybe even double again by the middle of the next decade. Could you explain the kind of advantage this might provide China, not just in the nuclear balance of power, but also in a conventional conflict, say, if China decided to go for the jugular in Taiwan?
Thank you, Senator Cotton. Nice seeing you. I think, when we put in perspective where we were just, left of probably 2018, and we saw it as a nascent threat, and the breakout that my predecessor announced, you're right. What it does in changing the calculus in our strategy is now we must be prepared for 2 nuclear peers instead of 1. I would garner to say, Senator, included in that is 2 nuclear peers that have a transactional relationship that has blossomed over the last couple of years as well. So as we look at the capabilities that we're seeing on all three legs, you're absolutely right. Having an H-6N with long-range strike capability is not a regional hegemon weapon system. Having land-based ICBMs is not a regional hegemon weapon system. Building out their submarine forces and having hypersonic weapons that are dual-use capable and fobbed is not necessarily seen as a regional hegemon weapon system. So it makes us look at things a little differently, and our strategy has changed to compensate for that.
Thank you. I'll close on a couple points. I made them before. You've agreed with them before. I'd love to hear your agreement one more time. Some people say about our nuclear weapons that we spend way too much money on weapons we never use. I respond to them that we actually don't spend that much money on them. We may be spending some money modernizing them now compared to our total defense expenditures, but more importantly, we have used our nuclear weapons every single day going back 80 years this August to prevent the kind of war that the world saw twice in 20 years. Do you agree with that, General Cotton?
I absolutely agree with that, Senator.
Thank you. I want to finally add my note of agreement with our fantastic chairwoman, Senator Fisher, on what she said about the nuclear-armed sea-launched cruise missile, also known as SLCM-N. The program held on by a thread throughout the Biden era, thanks to congressional support, and I'm glad that you acknowledge how important it is, and that if anything, we need to do everything possible to accelerate that capability. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank
you. Dr. Mink, I want to return to Senator Fisher's line of questioning about nuclear modernization. The Air Force is responsible for 2 of the 3 legs of the nuclear triad, as she said. Sometimes the funding for that, which is known as the pass-through, counts against, you might say, the top line for the Air Force in internal budget battles. I personally worry the Air Force can't execute all of its tasks when it comes to its traditional conventional tasks while also executing nuclear modernization of our missiles and our long-range bombers. Do you agree that we need to take a new look at the top line for the Air Force, and especially to account for that nuclear pass-through to ensure the Air Force has the budget necessary to perform all of its vital tasks?
Yes, Senator, thank you for the question, and thanks for the opportunity to talk a little bit offline. The Air Force is kind of in a unique position almost in its history. We're in the process of modernizing pretty much across all the 5 core mission areas. The nuclear triad, nuclear deterrence is a huge part of that. As you just kind of mentioned, those systems are pretty expensive. One of the first things I plan to do is take a holistic look at all of the modernization and all the readiness bills that we have coming, and then I will put together and advocate for what resources I think are necessary to execute all of those missions, and then working both within administration and with Congress, which I've found throughout my time working national security, a good relationship with Congress is critical. So if confirmed, I'll be back here walking through what I think we need to do.
Thank you. And I'm sure in the internal budget battles, you remind everyone, it's not just my top line, I've got this big slug of nuclear modernization here as well.
Yes, Senator, there's a couple slugs in there
Okay, thank you. Another thing that worries me is retaining our troops, especially in the Air Force, retaining fighter pilots. We're nearly 1,800 pilots short, I believe, these days. For every 4 jobs requiring a fighter pilot, we just filled 3 of them. I have my thoughts on some of the factors driving this, in part due to some roundtables that Senator King and I have held over the years with pilots. For instance, I think we can always probably do a little bit better job of paying our pilots, but I don't think you're ever going to pay them enough compared to what commercial airlines will pay them or private companies. People join the Air Force to fly fighter pilots because they want to fly high-performance jets in defense of our nation, and we need to do a better job of getting them more time in the cockpit training here and downrange. I think it's one big factor. There are other factors as well, but could you give me your thoughts on that, and also just a commitment that you're going to look carefully at that?
Yeah, I'll commit. I'm going to look carefully at that. And Senator, I think your discussion about, I see that as kind of a quality of service, quality of life, pay, that only goes so far. We need to make sure, not just with pilots, but across our highly skilled areas within our workforce, that they have the opportunity to do what they've been trained, what they love to do. I think that could be a bigger impact on maintaining some of these highly technical skill sets like pilots and others, letting them do what they were trained to do. I've been around since I was a navigator. We've always struggled with maintaining pilot levels. It is much larger than just the funding. And Senator, not to necessarily ask something of you, but if you have other opinions, if I'm confirmed, I'd love to sit down and talk to about it.
And thank you. Just one more question for you, Dr. Mink. Ebbing Air National Guard Base in Fort Smith is now the home of the International Fighter Training Mission for the F-35. It's going to grow from 4 aircraft today to 48 fighter aircraft in the next 3 years. That's twice as fast as the normal bed down for standard F-35 mission. The Air Force has worked well with our state and local partners and Senator Bozeman's office, Congressman Womack's office, and mine. Can I get your commitment that we'll continue to work well as we go through this very fast, but so far very successful bed down to ensure that Ebbing has the resources it needs?
Absolutely, Senator.
Okay. Mr. Bass, first off, I want to apologize that I missed our meeting yesterday. I hate to stand up a wonder boy from Arkansas Tech University, right across the river from Dardanelle, Arkansas, but glad to see you today, and congratulations on your nomination. I continue to hear that the MHS Genesis program is causing problems for recruiting and converting recruits into new troopers, not just airmen, but soldiers, sailors, Marines, and so forth. Obviously, we want to work efficiently with medical records, and we don't want to bring in people who are going to be washed out because of serious medical conditions 6 months after basic training. But we've discovered a lot of things. I think in past days, let's just be honest, your recruiter would have told you to lie about at MEPS when you went there. You know, that you had a broken arm when you played junior high football and then went on to play 4 more years of senior high football, and it gets recorded now, and you have to go through a bunch of rigmarole. In the meantime, you get a better job doing something else. Can you take a look at how Genesis is operating to make sure that we catch the serious problems we need to without deterring and delaying young men and women who are eager to sign up and serve in our military?
Thank you, Senator. Go Razorbacks. And I will commit to taking a look at the accession standards. You know, a good problem to have is that we have too much information in our medical health record. You know, we'll take that, but we also need to take a look at our accession policies, and I commit to working that and working with your office.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Senator Shaheen. Senator Cotton.
General Kane, congratulations on your nomination, and thank you for your 34 years of service. Thank you also for your service at times in the intelligence community, where your reputation is as strong as it is in the Department of Defense. Let's continue on the theme of Senator Shaheen's question about providing your candid military advice. I think, as the chairman and Senator Reid pointed out, a lot of people don't understand the chairman of the Joint Chiefs is not in the chain of command. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
By law, your role is the principal military advisor. So if the president makes a decision on this, that, or the other policy or operation about this, that, or the other country, that goes from him to the Secretary of Defense down to some other commander, say the CENTCOM commander or the Secretary of the Army or what have you. You're on the side giving advice to everyone, but you're not actually carrying out decisions in the chain of command.
That's correct, Senator.
And I think Congress gave the chairman that role because we wanted someone who was free from those day-to-day demands of operational or managerial duties to provide that candid military advice. And as Senator Shaheen said, it's important that you provide that advice even when you think the principal doesn't want to hear it, the Secretary of Defense or the NSC or the president. But I think you said in your opening statement that you were an unusual or an unconventional nominee. Which was it?
I think it was unconventional.
Unconventional,
Senator.
okay. I agree with that. I think most people would as well. You don't strike me as the kind of guy who has been angling for this job for 34 years. Is that a fair statement?
That would be a fair statement, Senator.
And did you expect to get this job as recently as, I don't know, 3 or 6 months ago?
I did not, Senator.
So is there any reason to think that you're not going to be providing your candid and best professional military advice, even and maybe especially when you've gotten wind, say, a little birdie has tipped you off that maybe the Secretary or the President doesn't want to hear what you have to say?
Senator, no. And, I went to VMI,
where I lived in the new barracks for 4 years and looked out on a statue of George Caleb Marshall for 4 years. And, sir, if I failed to provide my candid advice to the Secretary of the NSC or the President, I think General Marshall would climb out of his grave and hunt me down.
Good, thank you. Because I think every president, every NSC, every Secretary of Defense needs that, especially from a chairman. Not to give them their candid advice when it's welcome, but even when they know it's unwelcome. Now, as you said, though, you're an advisor. You're not a decider. You're not a commander. Once the Secretary, in some cases, or the President probably in most cases, has made the decision, then you're on the side making sure that decision is going to be carried out by the relevant commanders, right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Let's look at something specific in this area now, and that's the threat of Iran's nuclear program. By some estimates, they could be just weeks away from having at least testable, if not workable, nuclear devices, maybe as few as a couple years away from having missiles that could hit us here in the United States. The President has said repeatedly that he wants a peaceful resolution to this crisis. But he's also said, I think as recently as last week, quote, if they don't make a deal, there will be bombing, end quote. He said for at least a decade I've known him that Iran cannot be allowed to get a nuclear weapon. Do you agree with the President's assessment that Iran cannot be allowed to get a nuclear weapon?
I do, Senator.
And do you agree that because of their missile programs, especially the flimsy cover of the space launch program, that this is not just a threat to our troops in the region or Israel or our Arab friends in the region? This could be an imminent and existential threat to the United States itself in just a few short years.
Senator, I think that's an accurate statement.
If the President asks for military options to support what he has said publicly, that if Iran is not willing to make a deal, that there will be bombing, do you commit to provide him the best and candid advice you can about viable military options and the likely consequences of each?
Senator, I think that's what the job of the Joint Staff is to do, is to provide a range of options for the President to consider and then allow him to select whatever those options will work best for him.
Thank you. And finally, there's some hysteria about the prospect of the President ordering these strikes or someone like you in uniform providing him advice that it's going to lead to another forever war or another endless war. Are you aware of operations, maybe operations against Iran like the tanker wars in 1988, in which the forceful but discriminate application of military power did not lead to a forever war or an endless war, but rather led to peace and stability?
Yes, sir. Those examples in our history do exist.
Maybe the Qasem Soleimani strike in 2020 as well that caused Iran to pull in its horns for the rest of President Trump's first term. Thank you, General Kane. I agree with all of what you said in your opening statement on the topics that most Americans think about when they think about the Department of Energy, things like infrastructure and permitting reform and electricity power generation. I want to focus, though, on the last thing you mentioned there, the national labs, which overlaps with my work as chairman of the Intelligence Committee. I think a lot of Americans probably don't appreciate that the Department of Energy is in charge of all these national labs that do exquisite research into nuclear energy or quantum computing, artificial intelligence, and other things. I think they'd be shocked to know that last year 40,000 foreigners visited these national labs, and fully 1/5 of those, 8,000, were from Russia and China. Doesn't seem to me like the smartest step to be letting Russian and Chinese scientists into our national labs. What do you think, Mr. Danley?
Yeah, of course, Senator, I completely agree with that. And when you say the word visited, we don't just mean passing through. We mean actually conducting science in close proximity to the scientists that are already working at the labs. The national labs are fundamental not just to the research and science that I mentioned a second ago, but they also have national security missions. And it is, when I first learned about the number of adversarial nations, scientists that are at the national labs, I was so surprised by it that I thought at first that I didn't hear correctly. It was shocking, the number. And it's not just a matter of losing the scientific and technical edge I talked about, it's also a matter of grave national security interest that has to be looked at and if necessary, dealt with.
I think most Americans would be shocked to know that 1 out of every 5 foreign scientists visiting our national labs from China and Russia. And also, although not in its large numbers, they come from places like Iran and Cuba and North Korea as well. Do you know how many American scientists get to go to Russia and China's equivalent of national labs?
None.
The answer would be zero. That does not seem to me to be reciprocal, to use a term that the president likes. That's why on the Intelligence Committee for years, it's been a matter of bipartisan concern that our national labs seem to allow these scientists in. They almost seem to compete to bring them in because the decisions are made at the lab level, not at the level of what you might call the headquarters element of the Department of Energy, drawing on your own intelligence unit and the intelligence community more broadly. I have legislation to address this problem. I bet a lot of the problem, though, can be addressed by you and the Secretary. So can I get your commitment, Mr. Danley? You'll take a look at the legislation. You'll see what needs to be done to address this threat and do as much as you can with your existing authorities once confirmed?
Absolutely. If I should be lucky enough to be confirmed, I'll work with you to deal with this problem.
Thank you. The second topic I want to address, again, something that a lot of Americans probably don't think about when they think about the Department of Energy, is the National Nuclear Security Administration, NNSA. But it's about half of the department's budget. They do a lot of very important work for our nuclear weapons arsenal, a lot of research, a lot of production. One thing in particular that they do is the production of plutonium pits for nuclear weapons. We've had a challenge with this for years. We were supposed to get to the point where we could produce 80 new plutonium pits by 2030 under the Biden administration. That slipped to 2035. Can I get your commitment that you'll advocate for NNSA to get all the budgetary resources it needs to perform its vital mission?
So the NNSA is one of the fundamental elements of American national security. The weapon stockpile is the ultimate instrumentality of sovereignty for the United States, and I commit to doing everything I can to ensure, should I be confirmed, that NNSA's mission is discharged fully.
And specifically trying to get back to 80 pits? What they need to do so in the New Mexico and South Carolina facilities?
So I am not certain, because I am not at the Department of Energy, what the necessity is regarding the rate or level of pit production, but it is fundamental to our weapon stockpile, and I absolutely commit to doing everything I can to ensure that the duties are discharged.
Okay, thank you. Senator Heinrich, thank you for your service to the country. I know you'll be sad not to get to come here and testify in front of the committee anymore after today. General Cavoli, in his first term, President Trump withdrew the United States from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. Finally, after years of Russian cheating with impunity, that's allowed our military to develop longer range missiles. The Army has been developing the long range hypersonic weapon, a ground launch missile that has a range of up to, well, it has a long range, I'll put it that way. It appears that the Army's first multi-domain task force in the Pacific is slated to get this weapon first. Do you see a role for the long-range hypersonic weapon in EUCOM?
I do, Senator Cotton. I think it would be very useful. I think coming out of the INF treaty was a very important move, and it's one that we now should capitalize on in all the relevant theaters. The Army's multi-domain task force long-range fires battalion is the real key component. It's got several systems in, as I think you know, and there is a move to, there is a request out there to place one of those in Europe that I could get into in closed session in detail with you if you'd like, sir.
Okay, thank you. General Langley, the Trump administration has conducted multiple airstrikes against al-Shabaab targets since taking office. What's your current assessment of the threat that al-Shabaab poses to our national interest and specifically to the U.S. homeland?
Senator, al-Shabaab is especially a heightened terrorist threat, namely because they're colluding with the Houthis across from Yemen. And so we're watching that closely. The President and the Secretary of Defense has given me expanded authorities. I can talk about those details as far as expanded authorities, but I will say we're hitting them hard. I have now had the capability to hit them harder.
Okay, al-Shabaab is in the Horn of Africa on the East Coast. There's obviously other terrorists operating throughout Africa associated with al-Qaeda or the Islamic State. What's your assessment of the threats that all those terrorists on the African continent pose, and again specifically pose to the U.S. homeland?
Senator, less left unchecked, they will have a direct threat on the homeland, whether it's just their networks or even their ideology. We remember 1 January 2025, what happened in New Orleans. Still, there are some that have been indoctrinated by this false ideology of Islam.
Okay. General Cavola, coming back to you, outside of your AOR, but I think perhaps with some follow-on effects, the Assad tyranny fell late last year. That has imperiled Russia's access to its naval base in Syria. There have been reports that Russia is looking to replace that base elsewhere in the Mediterranean, including potentially in Libya. How do you assess the situation in the Mediterranean and Russia's access to the Mediterranean since the fall of Assad?
Senator, they've suffered a big loss. They've suffered the ability to maintain sustained maritime operations in the Eastern Mediterranean. It's much more difficult for them now. They are searching, and I'll let Mike talk about this if you'd like to, sir. They're searching for alternative basing to replace Tartus, which they've mainly lost on the north shore of Africa. They've failed so far to achieve a long-term agreement for a major base. So this will be significant. It's significant not only because we have a reduced presence of submarines, Russian submarines in the Eastern Mediterranean now. It's also surface vessels that find it harder to do sustained operations. And finally, it's much more difficult for Russia to sustain the operations, both overt and covert operations that they're doing in Africa without those bases. And the Alliance and US-UCOM are both taking actions to try to make sure we keep them boxed.
General Langley, anything to add?
Yes, Senator. I watched Maghreb closely. Russia does have initiatives because that is NATO's southern flank, from Morocco to Algeria and even Tunisia and Libya. I engage with them closely for shared objectives of denying the militarization of NATO's southern flank.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Lucas, Congress created the Office of the Director of National Intelligence to eliminate stovepipes of intelligence and to ensure integration across the elements while working hand in hand with the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security. That's the Director of Defense Intelligence and the Principal Advisor to the DNI on Defense Intelligence. To ensure that national and military intelligence needs are met, Congress also sought to ensure analytic objectivity standards were set and they were met. Will you commit to working with this committee to restore the ODNI to what it was originally intended to be?
Yes, Chairman. If confirmed, I would commit to that.
In your experience, is ODI on the path to becoming just a part of the bureaucracy that it was created to eclipse?
Thank you, Chairman. As I said in my opening remarks, I have seen ODNI grow over the years, often without regard to its original mission. So yes, I would agree with that statement. As I said earlier, I believe ODNI has a very important role to play, but we need to ensure that it's focused only on that role and not engaged in business that is properly left to other IC agencies.
Thank you. One point in particular is the relationship between the IC, the intelligence community, and the Department of Defense. I'm not aware of many processes or procedures, at least effective ones, for ensuring the needed collaboration between the DNI and the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security. What are your thoughts on how we can improve that relationship?
Well, Senator, I do agree that that is a critical relationship. The DoD brings a lot to the intelligence community, a lot of resources, a lot of individuals, a lot of power. My understanding is that currently there is a weekly sync between the Director's Advisors for Military Affairs and OSD INS. If confirmed, I would certainly expect that I would also have regular communication with that same office, with the Undersecretary, and I would be willing to work with the committee to look at whether we need any sort of formal processes or procedures to put in place to ensure that that coordination is continuing as it should.
Thank you. Let's turn our attention to China. This year's annual threat assessment stated, quote, China stands out as the actor most capable of threatening U.S. interests globally, end quote. There's, of course, bipartisan support in Congress for ensuring that the Chinese communists don't achieve their goals in replacing the United States as the world's dominant economic and therefore military superpower. What's your opinion on whether the intelligence community is currently properly postured to address the threat posed by communist China?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I have seen over many years as an intelligence officer that the IC has assessed that China is a key adversary and has placed a high priority on collecting and analyzing information to provide to policymakers regarding China's plans and intentions. If confirmed, I would certainly look forward to working with the IC agencies themselves to ensure that they are adequately resourced and are placing those resources in the areas that they need to be vis-a-vis China. That's, of course, if I'm confirmed. I lack that bird's eye view, quite frankly, right now about what each agency is, but certainly that would be a priority for me if I'm confirmed.
Thank you. Mr. Kent, I want to turn to the threat of terrorism. China is, without question, our most serious long-term threat, the only nation that has the size and the wealth and power to potentially replace the United States as the world's dominant power. But as you say in your opening statement, the threat of terrorism remains serious and ongoing. To borrow from a quote sometimes attributed to Trotsky, you may not be interested in terrorism anymore, but terrorism is still interested in you. Is that correct and something Americans need to understand?
Thank you, Senator. I think that's 100% accurate. I mean, look, we have real threats that come from the Chinese Communist Party and other traditional state actors. However, terrorists want to kill us right now in this moment. And tragically, many of them are already here inside the United States. And there's countless other adversaries we have that are terrorists overseas that are plotting to kill us right now.
And welcome back. Admiral, let's take a step back to first principles. We've talked a lot here about the threat that China poses to Taiwan and what you're doing to try to address that threat. I'd like you to explain why that threat is so severe. You know, some people might look at the map and say, well, Taiwan is a small island and it's really far from us and it's really close to them. And China has marched into Tibet in the past and they've marched into Hong Kong in the past, and that was bad and they shouldn't have done those things. But it didn't lead to World War and it didn't lead to Great Depression. On the other side, you've got one of your ancestors, so to speak, Douglas MacArthur, who said at the dawn of the Korean War that the domination of Taiwan by an unfriendly power would be a disaster of utmost importance to the United States. He was speaking then, as we do today, of communist China. Ian Easton, a Naval War College professor and one of the military's leading experts on Taiwan, says that it's possible that the Chinese invasion of Taiwan would cause a 21st century version of the Great Depression. And the famed investor Ken Griffin put it more bluntly, it's an immediate Great Depression. So why is it that Taiwan is different? Why is Taiwan such a hot flashpoint? Why could it lead not only to a catastrophic war, but also global Great Depression? Why should Americans care about an island on the other side of the world?
Senator Cotton, that last point is quite salient. Many a research organization postulate that conflict in the Western Pacific over the Taiwan question would result in a 25% GDP contraction in Asia and a knock-on effect of 10 to 12% GDP reduction in the United States of America, with unemployment spiking 7 to 10 points above base and likely 500,000 excess deaths of despair above base as well. And this is just the importance of the regional stability to the world economy and its effect on people's lives. And this is as a function of freedom of navigation. It's a function of the world dependency on semiconductors. In the longer term, for the United States, our strategic center of gravity is our network of alliances and partners. The sum total of 350 million people's talent, 130 million Japanese, 130 million Philippines, 25 million Australians, not to mention 500 million in Europe, as well as partners in across the globe. The knock-on effect of the brittleness of that network of alliances and partnerships means that some of the states could confer and submit to the PRC's mode of exploitation en route to their long-range goal of setting the rules of the world and reaping the benefits of that. And then finally, some nations in the area of responsibility will submit, but others, it would never happen just because of the historic tensions. And in that case, the proliferation question comes to mind, with nuclear-armed states that are treaty allies with the United States and minimal warning for launch among those nuclear states. It is of vital interest for the United States. My job is to have a force ready to make those choices. You know, I don't make the choices on whether or not it's important or not. I'm explicating how it is, and my job is to present those options to the Commander-in-Chief to be ready to fight and win.
And to be clear, a lot, if not all of those consequences would follow whatever the outcome of a conflict over Taiwan, whether China succeeds in going for the jugular or fails, or there's some kind of indecisive outcome. Simply having the conflict over Taiwan, which is such a center of gravity in the modern economy, could lead to many of the consequences you just outlined.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I can't quote the source. I will later, but most of the things I've studied indicate that American intervention would have that impact. A successful American intervention would potentially do so. So still a grave result, but half as grave with savings of a lot of human misery.
So the key then is to prevent the war from happening in the first place. We don't want to be in a situation where we have to win a war over Taiwan. We want to stop it from happening. And the way to do that is through strong military and resolute, confident leadership. What do you need most that you don't have right now to deter that conflict from happening in the first place?
Senator, counter C5ISR capabilities in cyber, space, counterspace, to ensure that the United States can see, understand, decide, act, assess, learn faster than the PRC can, to enhance our ability to blind, to deceive, and to destroy the adversary's ability to see and sense. And then in addition, the requirement to effect those long-range fires and effects that make the joint force effective in attacking centers of gravity, the platforms that they ride on, the sustainment that sustains them, absolutely key and critical foundation, and then the critical infrastructure across the theater that enables the force to reach the principles of expanded maneuver and puts geography on our side, which it is.
Thank you. Mr. Overbaugh, I see the intelligence and security shop in the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, not just through my work on this committee, but my work on the as chairman of the Intelligence Committee as well. INS should be the central advocate for the DoD's intelligence priorities and the central orchestrator to ensure that all defense intelligence agencies are meeting DoD needs. Yet it has often seemed to me that all the agencies under the INS umbrella appear to largely act on their own accord. Oftentimes it seems with little direct oversight. Can you commit to working with me on this committee and on the Intelligence Committee to ensure that we improve INS's enterprise governance to meet the defense, to make sure that the defense intelligence agencies are providing the intelligence that all of our warfighters need?
Yes, Senator, I absolutely can.
Thank you. Do you share that assessment, that it seems like oftentimes they're kind of all going off in their own direction?
Senator, I share your concerns in that regard, and what I can commit to you is, if confirmed for this position, I would place an emphasis on ensuring that the entire defense and intelligence and security enterprise remains responsive, particularly to combatant commanders and the warfighters, to ensure that they're well positioned to deal with global threats.
Thank you. I believe that part of the issue here is that INS is not optimally organized to meet that role of guiding the defense intelligence enterprise and advocating for defense intelligence priorities. I put report language in last year's NDAA that mandated a GAO review of the authorities, the roles, and responsibility of INS. Can you commit to using the findings of that review to inform any potential organizational changes that might be made in INS?
Yes, Senator. And as I mentioned in my opening statement, I'm particularly concerned about bureaucratic intransigence. And so analyzing the structure and process within the organization would be a key focus if I'm confirmed.
Thank you. As is often the case, while boxes and lines on a chart are important, they're not the only thing to consider. Sometimes it's not the most important thing that needs change. Sometimes it is leadership and culture. INS was dual-hatted as the Director of Defense Intelligence and the principal director or advisor to the Director of National Intelligence because Congress recognized the urgent need for a single proponent to ensure the broader national intelligence community meets defense requirements. Yet, I don't think there's any documented processes or procedures for ensuring that collaboration between INS and the ODNI, and I think the past interactions between ODNI and INS have not been adequate. Can you commit to working with Mr. Hansel to make sure INS is collaborating closely and productively and constructively with the ODNI?
I absolutely can, Senator, and this is something that Mr. Hansel and I have already had an opportunity to talk about. I share his passion, and I know that if we're confirmed, we look very much forward to working with ODNI Gabbard and the rest of her team to ensure that that lash-up takes place.
Thank you. And to be clear, the work that the defense intelligence agencies produce, I think is stellar and top-notch. It's often some of the best intelligence reporting I see on this committee, and especially on the Intelligence Committee. We want to make sure that we're providing proper guidance for all those agencies underneath your orbit, and also that they're having their proper influence within the broader intelligence community, especially claims on resources. Mr. Lohmeyer, the Air Force has been underfunded for a long time, especially in the last two Democratic administrations. That's led to a dramatically smaller fighter force than we've had at any time since World War II. Yet we need air superiority and given the broad range of threats we face. Do you commit to working with the administration and with Congress to be ensure that we increase resources going forward for the Air Force and Space Force?
Yes, Senator, I commit to that.
And you agree that we need those additional resources?
I do agree.
Thank you. Part of the problem we've had, too, is a shortage of pilots, 1,800 pilot shortage across the total force as of fiscal year 24. Retention is only averaging about 40 to 50%. Do you agree that we need to focus very intently on both recruiting and retaining pilots?
Yes, Senator, and this is a problem we've had for many years. It transcends administrations, and I know that Air Force leaders and administrations have tried to fix this problem. We try and throw money at the problem sometimes, and I think that that tends, frankly, to keep in those who are already probably on the fence and want to stay in anyway. But I talk to many pilots. They're interested in fixing their quality of life and quality of service concerns as well. And you have my commitment to try and solve these problems.
The work I've done on this committee with Senator King suggests the same. They're always welcome the money, but they don't join the Air Force, the Space Force, for a couple $1,000s more a month. They join it because they want to fly high-performance aircraft in defense of our nation. One final question. The Ebbing Air National Guard Base in Arkansas is home to a growing international fighter training mission. We have 48 F-35 scheduled to be located at Ebbing over the next 3 years. The Air Force has worked with Senator Bozeman and Congressman Womack and I very well over the years to get this critical mission bedded down. I assume you agree that foreign military sales training remains a vital Air Force mission?
I do, Senator.
Thank you. And if confirmed, we can count on you to continue to ensure that the Air Force supports the mission at Ebbing and has the resources necessary to train our allies?
Yes, Senator, you have my commitment that I'll work very closely with Dr. Mink if he's confirmed, and also be very transparent in my comms with you about the situation in your state.
Thank you.
Submit other questions for the record.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. Senator Cotton.
General Alden, you've talked about the need to buy new aircraft to replace our oldest fighters. Why is that? Under the current fighter production plans, we're going to be flying some of our oldest aircraft into the 2040s. Would purchasing more kinds of new fighters now both increase deterrence and improve our ability to defend the homeland while projecting power abroad in the near term?
Yeah, Senator, I think that's a great point, and having not only the right capacity but the capability for those to make sure that we have the right mix of the high end to be able to dominate and be relevant in an Indo-Pacific fight, as well as other fighters that may not need to be as sophisticated as our sort of our fifth generation, sixth generation, so to build out the whole capacity of the Air Force.
Will the CCA Increment 1 be able to replace manned fighters like the Strike Eagle and F-16?
Senator Cotton, we're on the sort of the nascent part of the collaborative combat aircraft, but my assessment as of right now, it will not replace that. It will be a great augmentation, and its threshold is to be able to work with the F-35 and the F-22 even before the F-47 gets fielded. So it will help us deliver more combat capability at a better cost point. But as far as replacing the manned fighters, that remains to be seen. What we have built into increment 1, my assessment right now is that would not be a good one-for-one replacement, but it does augment.
I did not think so. And given that the president's made the decision to move forward with the F-47 as a manned fighter, if it can't be replaced by autonomous aircraft, you wouldn't think it could do so for the 16 or the Strike Eagle either. Focusing on just the next decade then, our current acquisition options are pretty limited. We've got just a couple airframes right now going. Would you be able to use newly built U.S. configured Block 80 F-16s to strengthen our strike fighter fleet if Congress can find additional funds for such an effort?
Senator Cotton, to give you a good advice on that, I'd really have to look at what the defense industrial base can do on that, because my sense is that the current Block 70 is really eating up a lot of the production line and the production capacity in all the FMS sales. Looking at what that would be to take that export variant and adapt it to a Block 80 and the time it would take and where that would fall in the production line, I'd have to get back with you with more details to see if that would be an advisable situation.
Well, I'm glad you raised the FMS issue with the Block 70. For the quickest fielding timeline, would you be able to use modern Block 70s that are being made for our allies to meet critical needs if that option were available?
I'd have to take that one for the record, because I don't want to give you a yes or no, because specifically understanding what the export variant can and can't do and any sort of adjustments we would have to make it more easily integratable with our U.S. Built fighters. So I would need to see what the integration opportunities and costs would be before I could give you a good answer on that. But if I could take that for the record and give you a bit more detailed answer.
I would like, more details back to the committee on that, because getting to your first point, it's not just about the most highly capable fighters, the 22s, the 35s, and ultimately the 47s, but about the capacity, just the sheer number we have. And there are pretty significant shortfalls over the next decade, isn't that right?
Well, as we continue to keep the older aircraft, they do become more and more expensive to maintain. And as we mentioned before, the mission capable rate, it's not what we'd like it to be. It's again, the average F-16 is it was really the average F-16 that we have right now was built right about the time the Cold War ended. So even those F-16s are getting pretty old.
Okay. Finally, beyond the fighter aircraft, you've said the country needs more Air Force. Could you elaborate specifically on what you mean in practical terms and what specifically Congress can do to best support the country getting more Air Force?
Thank you, Senator, and I'll go very quickly. I think when we look at all of the things that we'll discuss here today, I would love to have a more rapidly modernized and capable air refueling force, because it's about range in the Pacific, and so having a survivable tanking to be able to do that. More Air Force, so as we do our operations in the Indo-Pacific in agile combat employment to ensure base resiliency, base survivability, so some more air-based air defense, to have more capabilities not only in the platforms, but in the munitions. Our munitions portfolio would need to increase. So there are so many things. And oh, by the way, I haven't even talked about the nuclear, which we cannot take our eyes off the ball on that, and as well as what it's going to take for defending the threats to the homeland. So all of those things, when you stack them up, and we try and prioritize with the limited budgets, there are many unhappy folks here that we don't have all that we would like to have. And so I think it's not only just more capacity, but also putting more lethality into that capacity.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. General Alvin, how are we going to get more range in our refueling in the near term?
Well, actually, I was talking about the survivability. So more.
Very, very much. Senator Cotton.
Gentlemen, welcome. I was at Fort Myer yesterday as the Old Guard recognized several persons as honorary members of the regiment for their critical work in getting the caisson platoon back up to limited operations, and also for their work at the Carter State Funeral, where the caisson platoon and its horses and horsemen so well represented the Army and the nation. And I want to thank you both for your work on getting the caisson platoon back in operation and on the path towards full operation very soon. Secretary Driscoll, I want to turn to the munitions crisis. that our nation faces. President Trump recently said we need to take a long, hard look at defense procurement and our defense industrial base because it's been withering down to nothing. Given all the money we spend on the Pentagon, it's unacceptable that we would ever run out of ammunition or be unable to quickly produce the weapons we need. You also acknowledged our munitions crisis at your confirmation hearing. You said one of the greatest problems facing our time is getting our munitions and getting our magazines back up to where they need to be. I assume 3 months on to the job, you still believe that addressing the nation's munitions crisis is vital if we are to deter and, if necessary, fight and win a war against China?
Absolutely, Senator, and I would even update and say it is, after 100 days of seeing it, it is worse than I thought at my confirmation hearing.
Thank you. So do I and most members of the committee. That's one reason why I was pleased to see that the Army Transformation Initiative focuses on arsenals, ammunition plants, and depots, your organic industrial base. Secretary Hegseth's memo about the initiative directs the Army to modernize the organic industrial base to generate the ammunition stockpiles necessary to sustain national defense during wartime by implementing 21st century production capabilities. Given this and your earlier remarks to Senator Wicker, I think it's safe to say that we share the Secretary's belief that the organic industrial base is a crucial element of our broader defense industrial base. You agree?
Unequivocally.
Thank you. And we're not the only ones either. There's other members of this committee like Senator Mullen and Senator Ernst and Senator Rosen who have long pushed the Army to strengthen its organic industrial base. That includes updating and expanding operations at facilities like Pine Bluff Arsenal in my state, McAllister Army Ammunition Plant in Oklahoma, Hawthorne Army Depot in Nevada. All these facilities, like all of them across the organic industrial base, are underused, and we have thought for some time the Army should be expanding them to meet urgent national security needs. And while I agree with you that the commercial industry will play an important role in solving the crisis, I think we all know that industry alone can't do it all. First, I'm doubtful that private businesses are going to take up work like smoke grenades or other niche capabilities required by the military. For instance, I'm skeptical that it's profitable for a business to stand up new production of white phosphorus ammunition, which is only produced in Pine Bluff, when the customer base is limited to the U.S. military and the cost of production are so high. Just some rough back-of-the-envelope calculations I've made suggest it would cost around $500 million to replicate that capacity. And second, I think we've also learned pretty definitively over the last 3 years of the Ukraine war that our commercial industrial base, while vital, simply doesn't have the capacity to produce all the munitions that our nation needs and that our allies need, much less what we would need in a major conflict. So I think expanding munitions production, especially for necessary materials like nitrocellulose and RDX that are currently choke points in the munitions supply chain, will require us to leverage the inherent advantages of the facilities that you own, that the Army owns, those organic industrial-based facilities like Pine Bluff Arsenal. All these places have highly trained workforces. They've already gone through onerous environmental permitting. They can handle munitions. They have the infrastructure that would only be replicated at a very high cost over many periods of years. Standing up munitions factories from scratch would cost millions and millions of dollars, while expanding operations at these existing facilities that we already own is much less costly and more efficient. And given that, can you commit to all of us, as the chairman suggested, that we work together to create a plan to expand and modernize the Army's organic base, including facilities like Pine Bluff Arsenal?
Senator, we absolutely want to work with this committee, and this is not intended to be a cop-out answer. As we look at our budget, one of the fundamental problems that we have is our military construction costs, and I'll do a parallel and then bring it right back, are 68.5% more expensive than if we just built something right on the other side of our fence line. And a lot of that is statutorily driven. There are some inefficiencies from government doing it, but generally speaking, there are so many constraints on us that when we try to work within our budget to expand our munitions supplies and we look at the math oftentimes says we're too expensive for ourselves. And so in the limited resource world that we live in, when we try to do these trade-offs, it's hard to justify. But working with this committee to try to streamline a lot of that, allocate additional resources, we are wholeheartedly in agreement that it is one of the most critical things for our country.
Thank you. I think we will want to examine the math, and we'll want to work together to find the path where we can meet the nation's munitions needs, some of which will come, no doubt, from expanded private production, but some of which is going to have to come from our organic industrial base. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, we also might want to work with you on alleviating some of the constraints you referred to that you mentioned make it more expensive to work with the existing facilities. And Senator Cotton has appeared and is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Before I get to matters of bipartisan concern on things like shipbuilding and munitions, I'm compelled to respond to the unhinged partisan rants by Senator Kaine and Senator Blumenthal about the riots in Los Angeles. I heard a lot of complaints about the use of the National Guard or the Marine Corps to defend federal property. Not surprisingly, a lot of attacks on Donald Trump. I don't think I heard condemnation of rioters and looters and arsonists and revolutionary anarchists that are burning down parts of Los Angeles. So let's put it in context. What's happening in Los Angeles? For 4 years under Joe Biden, we had a slow motion invasion of this country by millions of migrants, to include murderers, rapists, gang members, and other depraved savages. It wasn't just tolerated by Democrats in the Senate, it was celebrated. The American people spoke very clearly last year. They elected Donald Trump and a Republican Congress to secure the border, to enforce our immigration laws, and to deport violent, illegal aliens. That's exactly what our brave immigration authorities started doing on Friday. You have illegal aliens that were rounded up in Los Angeles that had committed heinous, violent crimes. Are we simply supposed to overlook them because they're in a democratic city or a democratic state? You can sexually assault children as an illegal alien, but if you're standing outside a Home Depot as a day laborer, immigration authorities are not supposed to arrest you and remove you from the streets to protect innocent civilians. And then what happened? Again, anarchists, revolutionaries, left-wing street militias started attacking law enforcement with bricks and cement and frozen water bottles, spitting in their faces, or much worse, setting cars on fire, looting buildings, setting buildings on fire. Under these conditions, of course, we should always want the local police to be the first line of authority, and they usually can restore order. In Los Angeles, they could not. How do we know? The Los Angeles Police Department chief told us that his forces were overwhelmed, even as he kept them on all after their shift. The next line of defense against such civil disorder is the National Guard. You would expect a responsible governor, when one of his city's police forces are overwhelmed, to call out the National Guard. But the incompetent and ideological governor of California refused to do so. So President Trump had to act. He has clear legal authority to federalize the Guard when necessary to protect innocent life and property, and especially federal officers and federal property. That's exactly what he did. Just like, for instance, in my state in 1957, when the racist Democratic governor tried to use the National Guard to prevent the desegregation of Little Rock Central High School. And President Eisenhower said, "I don't think so," and federalized the Guard to ensure the desegregation of Little Rock Central. And what did the governor of California do? Rather than recognize the error of his ways and cooperate and try to restore order in California, he began grandstanding, attacking the president, suing the federal government for using the National Guard to restore order, which again is one of its functions. Now, the third line of defense, as Senator Blumenthal referenced, is the Insurrection Act, the use of active duty troops to restore order. The president has taken a measured approach so far. He has said he doesn't think it's necessary to do so, but he will use that venerable law, which goes back nearly to the beginning of our republic, if called for, as it was, for instance, in the 1992 LA riots. Now, again, we all hope that these riots are stopped, that these outlaws and renegades are arrested and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. But the president has a constitutional responsibility to protect innocent lives, to defend federal officers, and to defend federal property, which is exactly what the Marines were sent to Los Angeles to do. Not to engage in crowd control, not to engage in civilian arrests, but to protect federal property. Now, my time has expired, so I won't get to address some of the important issues that you came here to speak about, gentlemen. But I do want to express my thanks to the California Guard and to the Marines that are currently trying to perform the simple responsibility of protecting federal officers, federal property, and help the local police restore order in Los Angeles.
Thank you. Senator Cotton.
Secretary, welcome. The demand for lithium has substantially increased in recent years, but the United States is currently only responsible for about 1% of lithium mining and less than 5% of advanced lithium chemical processing capacity globally. That despite lithium being necessary in a wide range of uses to include critically military capabilities. In September of last year, the Department of Energy selected Standard Lithium and Equinor for a $225 million grant to develop the lithium reserves in South Arkansas in the Smackover Formation, where geological survey has found between 15 million and 19 million tons of lithium. I know that this grant was announced before your tenure, and it's under review now. When can Arkansans expect an answer on when the grant will be approved?
I think all the sizable projects will be done this summer. You know, we're in middle of June now. By the end of August, for sure, maybe much sooner than that. And Senator, it is frustrating, I'm sure, for people on the other side. You know, we continue to fund existing projects, but given the track record of what happened when we walked in the door, which is pretty alarming, and the more I've dug into it, the more alarming it is. You probably heard me say before, you know, $90 billion, you know, lent after Election Day and before inauguration, over double the previous 15 years, 25 billion of that in the last 2 days. So in any case, there's a lot of crazy stuff, like a piece of paper. There was a project that got funded for $2.5 million, and then right at the end of the administration, with a sheet that said justification for increase, there was nothing on it. Its funding went from over $2 million, a little over $2 million to over $200 million. So we want to be careful with the American taxpayer monies, with monies you've allocated, that these projects are responsible, and credible, and thoughtful, and they're going to lead to some good results. You talk about a very exciting one. It's hard to build mines in America. Heck, we can get lithium out of brines, you know, out of boreholes and salt. So very exciting, very keen. We will be on that, and look, let's be talking about it. But we will sort that out this summer.
And we understand that there were a lot of inappropriate actions in the lame duck period, up to, as you say, the very last day. Projects being funded that, frankly, never should have been funded. But obviously, I think this is one of the critical projects that should be funded, lithium being so vital for almost every walk of modern life, and now being one of those things that's in dispute with trade negotiations with China. I want to turn to another topic we've discussed in the past, Mr. Secretary, that's security at our national labs. I've introduced legislation with Chairman Lee and some of my other colleagues that would ban foreign scientists from adversarial countries like Russia and China and Iran. You, I know, are conducting a review of security policies at our 17 national labs. When do you expect the review to be completed?
I mean, it is an ongoing process. And every time I see the lab directors, I saw half of them in Alaska. I saw all of them a week ago. I've been to half of the labs now, and I'll get to the other half. So it's a real topic, and it's a balance. It is a balance. Do we want, you know, Chinese nationals in our weapons research or in our critical economic new breakthrough stuff? No, we don't. No, we don't. But we have, of course, projects I have approved 3 Chinese foreign nationals to work on stuff because they have very unique expertise. It's not sensitive stuff, and if we don't use, a specific person, there were hundreds of potentials. So we've shrunk that down dramatically small because you raise a very real concern. I've stressed it to the lab directors. I think they get it too. So we have like a matrix approach, and we're trying to balance not stopping scientific research, but erring on the side of caution, that we have, these are national jewels and national gems, and clearly these countries of concern have clearly shown zero scruples to steal everything we have.
And speaking of caution, have you identified any urgent vulnerabilities that have needed to be patched before your review is complete?
We have...
you know what? Let me stop you. If you'd like to respond to me through other channels, it's fine.
Yeah, let's. I'll just say it's a real issue. It's a real issue.
Are there any Iranian scientists in any of our labs as of right now?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. I hope your lab directors hear that. All right. I'll yield back the rest of my time. Thank you.
Senator Cotton.
Gentlemen, congratulations on your nominations. Thank you to your families for their sacrifices over the year, and most important, thank you to the men and women you represent in your organizations and will represent for their service as well. I want to commend you both and commend everyone who was involved in the exceptionally successful mission against Iran over the weekend. Admiral Cooper, I want to return to a brief point you made with Senator Wicker. Although we have dealt a massive setback to Iran's nuclear threat, which is the worst kind of threat they could pose to us, Iran still poses a severe threat to our troops and to Americans around the world, right?
They do. They possess considerable tactical capability, one element of which we saw yesterday, which we thwarted in defense of Al Udeid Air Base.
And as the next commander of Central Command, one of your top priorities will be to continue the aggressive defensive posture and to continue the deterrence that's now been reestablished against Iran to defend our troops in the region as well as all of our friends in the region, Israel and the Arab nations.
Absolutely, sir. It would be an important priority, deterring Iran in proxy.
And I know that President Trump is mindful about this, that just because they had a very weak response yesterday, which they telegraphed in advance, doesn't mean that there might not be another response in a day or a week or a month or a year or 3 years. And it could be missiles or rockets against our troops, or it could be trying to blow up an embassy around the world or targeting American citizens for terrorist attacks, something that we have to be constantly on guard against because Iran has been terrorizing America and the civilized world for 46 years. Is that right?
Completely agree, sir. We've got to be in a three-point stance, ready to go every single day.
And at bottom, Iran didn't become a terrorist state because the United States bombed their nuclear bunkers. The United States bombed their nuclear bunkers because they're a terrorist state. Is that right?
I would agree.
Thank you. The strikes over the weekend showed the importance of having the world's very best industrial base and best munitions. The first time those had been employed in combat operations. They were incredibly successful. But the wars, both in the Middle East since October 7th and in Ukraine, has also revealed the fragility of munitions production in this country and the defense industry. Would you agree that we need to do a lot more to increase capacity for our munitions industrial base?
I would, sir. It's an area of significant concern. I know this is an area that senior DoD leadership is focused on right now. It's not a new issue. It's been around for some time, but clearly it's one we need to focus on right now.
And General Grinkowicz, I assume both in your current role in the Joint Staff and also your anticipated role in Europe, you would agree as well that we need to significantly expand munitions production in this country?
Senator, I would. As the Director for Operations on the Joint Staff with the responsibility along with my colleagues in logistics and sustainment for managing those munitions and pushing them to the fight, I'm acutely aware of some of the limitations that we have. And if confirmed, I would continue to advocate for strong investment on both sides of the Atlantic in the industrial base.
And our industrial base includes our defense contractors, companies that make this in the private sector, but it also includes our organic industrial base within the department. And given the track record over the last 3 years, would you agree that we really need an all-of-the-above strategy? We need to push both the private sector and lean on the assets we already have in the Department of Defense to produce the munitions our warfighters need?
Senator, I would. The organic industrial base does need that investment and attention. And on the private sector side, I would say we need to focus not just on traditional prime contractors, but also expand the competitive space to new entrants to get as much production capacity as possible.
Thank you. Admiral Cooper, I think I saw you vigorously nodding your head in agreement. Would you like to state that for the record?
Absolutely. I think the characterization of an all of the above strategy is the appropriate characterization.
Okay. The operation last weekend, I guess a couple Thursdays ago in Iran, with the use of drones launched from inside the country, as well as a few weeks ago by Ukraine inside Russia, has revealed once again the threat that drones can pose to our bases here in the United States. And I've worked with Senator Gillibrand and a lot of other senators to address that threat here in the U.S., and we're going to try to pass legislation to expand the department's authorities on it. But General Grinkowicz, it's also a real threat in Europe, the prospect of NATO or American positions being attacked by drones, as we saw in Iran or as we saw in Ukraine. How do you assess the drone threat right now in the European theater?
Yeah, Senator, I think it's an acute threat. It's a new technology, and our investment in both counter-UAS capability and the ability to do the same sort of activities with our own drones needs vigorous attention.
Thank you. I agree it's an acute threat. If Israel can do it to Iran, if Ukraine can do it to Russia, we need to assume that the bad guys could do it to us and our troops and our bases as well, whether overseas or even here at home, and we need to counteract it rapidly. Thank you. Congratulations, and thank you for your service, and thanks to your family for their services and sacrifices as well. As we discussed in our meeting, the United States is in a munitions crisis. We need more munitions of all kinds faster. Do you believe the Navy needs to increase the number of missiles and other kinds of munitions it buys in order to effectively deter and, if necessary, hopefully not, fight and win a war in the Pacific?
Yes, Senator. Wars are won with munitions.
Yeah, I certainly agree. To do that, would you say that we need to take an all-of-the-above approach of leveraging our organic industrial base as well as private industry to produce the munitions our warfighters need?
Yes, sir.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. What steps will you take, if confirmed, to CNO to ensure the Navy does, in fact, get those munitions that it needs?
Well, Senator, I think this is, first, thank you for our time together and some of the conversations we had on this topic. You know, this is no question an all-hands approach. It's really easy, I think, to finger point in this world of constraint and oversubscription and underperformance. So I'd like to break down that and really get to the brass tacks and really get a clear mapping of each of the munition lines in my head and with my team to understand where the critical stoppage points are on the flow of these munitions, where the waste steps are, where the sole source vendors are that are behind, and actually approach this from just a common sense way of thinking about unleashing the log jam of places where we're turning these munitions at pace and meet our contractual deliveries on time. It will not do any good with the money that you would like to budget for me if I can't translate into the actual delivery. So I need to work with the partners, make sure the Navy's clean on the way we do qualification and validation and certification steps, and I'm doing my role along with the industrial base to deliver these critical munitions, sir.
Thank you. We've heard a lot of talk this morning about shipbuilding. You've spoken extensively already about the need to increase the readiness of our naval fleet. Of course, readiness depends on having ships that are prepared to be at sea, and shipbuilding is only as good as our maintenance plan is for those ships once they're at sea. What can we do to address the maintenance backlog that the Navy faces today and get those ships out of dry dock and back into sea faster?
Well, Senator, that's a massive venture that I want to spend, if confirmed, my heart and soul in to get turned around. But there are some things I can give you that all shipyards need to adhere to, and that's giving the shipyard a clear demand signal for when the unit is coming in for the maintenance period. So that's a maintenance plan, and that planning needs to be stood off with sufficient time that the yard knows it's coming, has the funding and the workforce ready with a clear signal and a stable workforce. Long lead time material. We want the actual parts in the hand of the worker when it's ready to be assembled. And so the technical work documentation is part of that as well. And so so the planning time horizon, the location of where the actual maintenance is going to take place, the readiness to start day one, solid project management, and workforce development and skills are all part of all solutions and to your questions.
Okay, thank you. Final question. I think China poses the most severe long-term threat to our nation, and that is a primarily maritime domain, not exclusively, but primarily. At the same time, the Navy has to be ready and postured to face threats around the world. The Navy was part of the outstanding Operation Midnight Hammer that devastated Iran's nuclear programs, also led the way in the fight against the Houthi rebels in Yemen earlier this year. What do you see as the biggest challenges the Navy faces to being prepared, not just to deter the China threat, but also to ensure American leadership around the world on the seas?
Well, Senator, I think overall the biggest challenge is a capacity problem. And so that makes us have to think. So when you don't have enough stuff, you really got to put your brain to your schemes of maneuver, your ability to counter targeting, counter ISR, to actually have synchronization. There's an old saying that precision beats power and timing beats speed every time. So we have to bring those types of thinking in. But at the end of the day, mass will matter. It will. And so that's why I need the munitions, I need the ships, and I need to posture them correctly with great intelligence sources to know when and where to do that best. And I do want to thank you for calling out the Navy's role in the Midnight Hammer. I know our Air Force partners get a lot of the credit, but there were a lot of T-LAMs that were shot by the submarine force in that as well. So I appreciate that, sir.
Yep, they all did a great job. Thank you.
Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations.
Senator Cotton, are you prepared?
Always prepared. Mr. Lane. As General Counsel of the Air Force, I want to talk to you about the military's role in defending our homeland. I'm correct in assuming you believe the U.S. military has a central role to play in ensuring our homeland is secure?
Yes, Senator, absolutely.
I'm also correct in assuming that you believe terrorist organizations can pose a threat to the U.S. homeland?
Yes, Senator.
So it logically follows that you believe that the military has a role to play in defending the homeland from foreign terrorist organizations?
Yes, Senator, I would say it's among its top duties of the military.
Good. I'm glad we agree on such foundational principles. Unfortunately, we've seen in recent weeks an outcry from the left because President Trump ordered military strikes against the Trinidad terrorist organization's boats that are responsible for trafficking drugs to our shores and destabilizing the region. Drug cartels are responsible for hundreds of thousands of American deaths in recent years. The Constitution is clear. The President has Article 2 Commander-in-Chief authority to take action to address threats to our homeland. And when that action is limited and does not rise to the nature, scope, and duration of war, the Commander-in-Chief is empowered to act without a declaration of war. Stopping deadly narcotics from flowing into our country is a vital national security issue. I believe the President acted decisively and lawfully against foreign narco-terrorist groups trafficking poison onto our shores. I would simply ask all those viewing and listening, if Al-Qaeda or ISIS had set up shop in Latin America and was responsible for the deaths of more than 100,000 Americans in most years, what would you expect your government to do to protect you? That's exactly what we should be doing to Trinidad, and for that matter, every other cartel and narco-terrorist group. Mr. Beck, I want to speak to you about the NNSA, specifically Fort Chaffee in Arkansas, which is home to the training command for the NNSA's Office of Secure Transportation, which transports nuclear weapons all around the country. As NNSA progresses its modernization efforts, I suspect the demand for agents to transport weapons to their new storage sites or delivery platforms is likely to grow. What are your thoughts on a plan to improve both recruiting and retention of these essential agents?
Senator, thank you for the question. I'm particularly concerned about our marshals associated with the OST, the Office of Secure Transportation, because we have to continue to recruit and retain the folks that we have, and we've not done a particularly good job of that. I'm looking forward to, if confirmed, to addressing that and looking into the details, which I don't currently have the privilege of all the details of that, but I look forward to coming back to you with a plan on how to address that specific issue.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the commitment. I would appreciate you looking into it promptly because obviously it's vital for the NNSA's mission.
Yes, sir.
Apparently, when you walk in late, you are given the power of chairing the committee entirely. Or maybe Senator Wicker snuck out as a prank on me. Senator Rosen, you are recognized. All right. Each nominee here has provided substantive written responses to dozens of questions presented by the committee. Today, of course, members will be able to ask additional questions and hear from the nominees. Let me first begin by thanking both of the nominees for their willingness to, once again, answer the call to public service. I'd also like to recognize and thank their families and loved ones, many of whom are sitting right behind them, for offering their encouragement and support. Throughout their careers, both nominees before the committee have given their time and talents to our nation. Many of those on this committee have had the pleasure to work with Mr. Metzger, who currently serves as a professional staff member on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. As a designee to Senator Rounds, Mr. Metzger has spent his time with this committee covering issue areas including the CIA, FBI, covert action, counterintelligence, the Middle East, and Africa. Mr. Metzger, as Assistant Secretary for Intelligence and Analysis at Treasury, you will be expected to support the U.S. government with timely intelligence on economic security concerns, financial intelligence matters, and the implementation of economic statecraft tools. This is a critical position, especially as communist China wages an economic and technological war to dominate emerging technologies and works to displace the United States as the predominant economic and military power in the world. Next, we have Mr. Simmons, who is currently the Principal Deputy Legal Advisor at the U.S. Department of State. During his time at the State Department, Mr. Simmons has worked on foreign policy and national security matters, including intelligence sharing, covert action, and the law of armed conflict. Mr. Simmons also previously spent time in private law practice, where he handled international arbitration disputes pertaining to national security. Mr. Simmons, as CIA General Counsel, you will be expected to provide timely and efficient legal guidance in support of ongoing worldwide intelligence operations. The work of the General Counsel's office touches every aspect of the agency's business, including the procurement of resources, handling personnel matters, facilitating lawful intelligence collection, and conducting presidentially authorized covert action. This committee is committed to ensuring our intelligence agencies and officers return to the core mission of collecting clandestine foreign intelligence. After years of misplaced priorities, allowed bureaucratic bloat, risk aversion, and political judgment masquerading as legal advice to creep into America's intelligence apparatus, it is time to right the ship. With this in mind, I look forward to hearing from our nominees how they plan to approach their respective roles. Again, thank you both for being here and once again answering the call to public service. I now recognize our distinguished Vice Chairman for any open.
Recognized.
General Willis-Bach, congratulations on your nomination and thank you for your lifetime of service to our nation. I want to return to the theme of the readiness crisis because it deeply concerns me. We have pilots today taking on risks, flying combat missions in jets that haven't been updated since the 1990s. If fighter procurement stays where it is now, where are we taking the biggest risks over the next decade?
We've talked about the readiness of the aircraft, just the availability of the aircraft. So, you know, half of the aircraft that we have, say, and it's not the exact figure, but let's say half of the aircraft that we have are available on any given day. That means that you can't fly your full fleet. And so what that means is the pilots and the crews aren't training. And so the first thing we do is sustain the weapon system sustainment account so we get that aircraft availability up. Now the pilots can train on a more regular basis. You don't look at any professional sports person, athlete that practices 2 times a week. They practice almost every day. Well, our pilots are flying about 2 to 2.5 times a week in a fighter aircraft. That is not enough. That is why in my last assignment, I made it a requirement for Air Combat Command fighter pilots to fly a minimum of 3 times a week. When I was lieutenant, I flew almost 4.5 times a week. That will allow the proficiency that we can develop so that we are ready.
So fair to say that today's young lieutenants and captains in our fighters are not getting the same level of training and preparation that Lieutenant Wilsbach got back in the day?
I believe that's true. Now, they have an advantage that I didn't have, which is the simulators that we have today are highly capable, and there's a lot of value in the simulators. We didn't have that when I was a youngster, and we made up for it by flying more. That's why I dictated 3 sorties a week versus more than that.
Can our current 5th-generation fighters execute our major combat operational plans without the 4th-generation fleet?
Doubtful. The 4th generation brings a lot of capability. For example, the F-15 is an incredible workhorse. It's going to be able to fire some of the more long-range weapons that don't actually fit in the weapons bays of the 5th-generation aircraft. You can also use the 4th gen for missions that don't require penetrating into highly contested environment, like your defensive counter-air that tends to be defending your bases, et cetera. So, and then the 4th gen would obviously be doing homeland defense as well, which in the current environment, you can't just write off the fact that you won't be targeted because of the nature of the threat or global now.
I agree that it's doubtful at best, probably. Given all that, are we currently flying our legacy fleet at a significant risk level? And do you expect that risk to increase over the next decade?
I think the risk level is appropriate, and the commanders have authority to adjust that on a daily basis, and the crews know what that means in terms of execution.
I'm still concerned about the risk we're accepting as we wait for new capabilities to come online. If confirmed, would you be willing to leverage additional fighter production to replace our oldest jets and strengthen our strike fighter fleet?
Absolutely.
If Congress can find the funds and
That's the key.
send them your way?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Good. Finally, General Wilsbach, you probably know that Fort Smith is the home now of the F-35 International Training Mission. We've stood up this mission in record time thanks to all hands on deck cooperation from the Air Force, the Air National Guard, and state and local partners. Arkansas is already producing combat-ready F-35 pilots for our allies. If confirmed, can I get your commitment to ensuring that Ebbing Air National Guard Base continues to receive the resources it needs to effectively train our allied pilots?
I commit, Senator.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Cotton.
The consulting firm McKinsey estimates that the average proposed project subject to environmental review takes 4 to 5 years to move through the permitting process, with an average of 4 additional years spent litigating the project. According to the Breakthrough Institute, 75% of environmental litigation, like NHPA, is driven by a handful of environmental NGOs. Of the challenges, 10 organizations are responsible for more than 1/3 of often frivolous lawsuits. Agencies win approximately 80% of these cases. Nevertheless, litigation by these NGOs demonstrably slows and even kills necessary projects that could have lowered cost for consumers and increased reliability. Mr. McDonald, radical environmentalists have abused our court system and weaponized statutes such as the National Historic Preservation Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, and the Clean Water Act to slow or kill needful projects to increase supply and lower costs. Given this legal landscape, what reforms, in your opinion, are needed to stop this kind of radical lawfare and lower electricity prices for consumers?
Senator, thanks for the question. As was described in the testimony, I really think that the certainty that's provided with the regulations that we're asking for here will eliminate some of that. I'm not naive to think it's going to eliminate all of that, but I certainly think that, you know, if we have clear direction on what our responsibility is in the statute, it provides for less uncertainty and less kind of ambiguity in what our responsibilities are in those issues.
And if one of these radical groups unsuccessfully sues on a project, are they barred from suing under other statutes, or are they free to proceed under other statutes?
Senator, I'm not aware of the answer to that question, but perhaps somebody else with a better legal background would understand that.
I think they have many other statutes that they can proceed under, so they get multiple bites at the apple. When a project is shuttered because of such lawsuits, are construction workers and operators still paid?
Thanks for the question again, Senator. I would have to get back to you on that one as well. I'm not aware of the answer to that question.
Well, given that most workers are being paid by the hour, I think it's probably fair to guess that they're not being paid, which means this kind of lawfare is not just causing electricity supply to go down and prices to go up, but hardworking construction workers not to be paid. How does the threat of such open-ended lawsuits affect your decision-making for projects at MDU?
I think with all projects, and lawsuits or not, we always strive to do the best job possible. We work with our state, local, federal partners, tribal partners in instances where we're working on tribal land. We always try and do the right thing. And again, the clearer the statute is, the easier it is for us to plan for these projects, to execute these projects in an efficient and predictable manner.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back my time.
And you are recognized.
Admiral Carell, welcome, and congratulations on your nomination, and thank you and your wife for your decades of service to our nation. I thought nuclear testing might be a hot topic of discussion this morning. I'll put aside the obvious benefits of such testing to ensure the stockpile is fully prepared and ready for any contingency, but in general, tests of all kinds, whether nuclear or conventional, don't just provide those benefits, but also can send a strong message of resolve and deterrence. We saw the exact opposite effect at times during the last administration when President Biden canceled routine tests of our Minuteman III missiles to avoid supposedly escalating tensions with China or Russia. Could you speak to me in your best military advice about the impact of a successful weapons test, whether nuclear or conventional, on our adversaries and maintaining that regular testing schedule?
That regular testing schedule, thank you for the question, Senator. If confirmed, the STRATCOM commander is responsible for the requirements associated with accuracy and effectiveness of the weapons. And that then drives the services and other subject matter experts' analysis of the testing required to meet those objectives. So I agree fully with you. It is a really, really important aspect of demonstrating the reliability and credibility of our nuclear deterrent, and that's an essential attribute for deterrence versus particularly in this era.
Thank you. Critics of our nuclear arsenal often claim that it costs too much and we never use them. I like to rejoin that we use our nuclear weapons every single day, and we have for 80 years. Although we have not detonated a nuclear weapon in combat for 80 years, the very existence of them and at their high state of readiness every single day for 80 years has deterred the kind of major conflict we saw twice in less than 20 years in the 20th century. Do you agree with me, Admiral, on the absolute necessity of both maintaining and modernizing our arsenal to preserve this deterrent effect?
I agree, Senator.
Thank you. Do you also agree with me, given this remarkable run of 80 years without a general global war, after having two of them in 20 years, that we don't actually spend all that much money on our nuclear forces?
I agree with you, Senator, and I would echo and foot stomp your point with respect to our nation's deterrent gets exercised every single day, and the credibility associated with that prevents war.
And I think I'm right, just ballparking it, that we spend about 5% of our total military budget all in on our nuclear arsenal, maybe a little more at the height of modernization, maybe a little less outside of it. Is that a fair estimate?
That's a fair estimate, Senator.
Do you think 5% plus or minus a little bit is a reasonable expenditure to avoid global world war?
I agree, Senator.
I agree too. Another thing that's remarkable, if you look over the last 80 years, is that there aren't more nuclear states, especially nuclear states in regions that have deep tensions and where nations are often at daggers drawn. Do you believe that our nuclear arsenal and the extended deterrent that we provide to our allies has contributed to the relative lack of nuclear proliferation since 1945?
I agree, and I would say it's an essential element of our nuclear proliferation strategy, of those partnerships.
Yeah, our nuclear weapons and modernizing our nuclear weapons are an essential element of our counter-proliferation strategy.
Yes, Senator.
And it's a good thing that we don't have dozens of nations thinking, I better get nukes before the people that hate me across the border get nukes.
Yes, Senator.
Thank you, Admiral.
Captain Cotton.
Witnesses sometimes come before this committee and they face charges and they don't always get to respond to them. It's my practice on certain occasions to allow them to respond. Code Pink lunatics used to accuse Secretary Austin of committing war crimes. I always allowed him to deny that calumny for him and Israel. At Secretary Hegseth's hearing, Code Pink lunatics accused him of being a Christian Zionist. I thought that was an odd claim. I'm a Christian. I'm a Zionist. Is there anything wrong with being a Christian Zionist? Secretary Hegseth didn't think there was, so I allowed him to respond to the Code Pink lunatics. Earlier today, both Secretary Wicker and Secretary Scott, I'm promoting him, maybe demoting. Senator Wicker, Senator Scott asked you, Mr. Dahmer, about the question on Romanian troop withdrawals and whether Romania was notified, and you said they were notified. But then Senator Slotkin said, not citing press reports as the other senators had, but citing the Romanian ambassador and Romanian officials, that these Romanian officials were not, in fact, notified in advance. They learned it from the press. But Senator Slotkin didn't give you a chance to respond to that. Would you care to respond to her assertions of what the Romanian ambassador and other Romanian officials said to her?
Senator, thank you very much for the opportunity to respond to that. My understanding, I was not the specific individual to conduct the notifications to the Romanians. My understanding is that the Romanians were briefed before this was made public. Obviously, just as the United States government is not a monolithic actor, the Romanian government is not either. So I'm not aware of which specific individuals are briefed. I would be happy to follow up for the record to provide you with that information. But thank you for the opportunity.
Do you believe Senator Slotkin is misrepresenting her conversations with the Romanian ambassador?
I have no reason to think that she's misrepresenting her conversations.
What about the Romanian ambassador misrepresenting his?
I'm not aware of any reason for such a mischaracterization. But again, I would be happy to follow up with which specific individuals or positions in the Romanian government were notified.
Okay. A second issue, the alleged pause on aid to Ukraine earlier this year. Press reports cited the policy shop as being the reason for that pause. I think Senator Wicker and Senator Scott both asked about that, and you said there was no such pause. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes, Senator.
Okay. Another third unexpected development earlier this year was a review of the so-called AUKUS agreement, Australia, UK, US submarine agreement, that this caught many of our friends in the UK and Australia by surprise. Press reports said it even caught administration officials by surprise. Can you comment on whether or not this review, which originated in the policy shop, was coordinated in advance with Australia and the UK and others in the administration?
Yes, Senator, and thank you again for the opportunity to address this. Secretary Hegseth testified, I believe, to the House that he was directing a review of the AUKUS initiative as an initiative of the previous administration. He directed Undersecretary Colby to lead that review for the department. I think as President Trump was very clear in his Oval Office meeting with Prime Minister Albanese that the president supports AUKUS and advancing AUKUS. As a signature initiative of the Biden administration, I think it was natural and right to ensure to review that it accorded with the president's America First, Peace Through Strength agenda. I would note that both Australia and the United Kingdom, when they underwent changes in governments, conducted their own reviews of AUKUS as well. But I think as the president was clear, we're advancing AUKUS and working to ensure its success. And I would just, as a matter of forces and capabilities, just really stress the critical importance of our nuclear-powered attack submarine fleet to defend the homeland and deter our rivals.
So we're full steam ahead on AUKUS now.
Senator, I would welcome the opportunity to brief you in a classified setting on the conclusions and recommendations of the review, but I think President Trump was absolutely clear that he supports AUKUS and we're moving forward.
A couple other items. There were press reports in June that the policy shop was opposed to deploying more assets to the Middle East during the 12-day war. These press reports surfaced after Israel had begun its strikes in Iran, but before our strikes on their nuclear facilities. So while the shooting was going on, are those press reports inaccurate that the policy shop opposed deploying additional assets in that critical period of a few days?
Senator, I'm not aware of the reports you're referencing. I certainly don't want to get into classified discussions, but I think absolutely the policy organization and certainly me have been committed, and if confirmed, I will continue to ensure that the President and the Secretary are provided with the best possible credible military options. I think Operation Midnight Hammer is a signal success of the administration and the Department and the Joint Force in being able to ensure peace through strength, including with decisive military force.
Okay. Also in June, there were media reports that the so-called 2x2 meeting with Secretary Hegseth and Secretary Rubio meeting with their Japanese counterparts were canceled because the policy shop had insisted that Japan increase its defense spending. The meeting, as I understand it, was in fact canceled. It didn't go forward. Is that media report incorrect, that the Japanese were offended by the policy shop's insistence?
Senator, that is not my understanding of why the meeting was canceled.
Okay. Well, could I just say it's curious to me that these are 5 different instances: Ukraine aid, notification about the Romanian troop withdrawal, the AUKUS review, deploying assets in advance of Midnight Hammer, and the meeting between Japanese and U.S. officials, all coming out of the policy shop. And I understand that media reports can be wrong, believe me, but it just seems like there's this pigpen-like mess coming out of the policy shop that you don't see from, say, intel and security and acquisition and sustainment. Why do you think it is that there's so many controversies emanating out of the policy shop and not these other offices in the department?
Senator, I would like to understand that myself. I mean, as you, I think, just indicated, there's a lot of fake news out there. There's a lot of inaccurate reporting. And I think I would be happy to address other specific questions, as I have done for each of these cases.
Thank you. Mr. Borders, one question. I assume you're aware that Ebbing Air National Guard Base in Fort Smith has the F-35 training mission?
Yes, Senator.
Good. I can tell you we're well prepared for my questions then, because obviously we think this is a critical part of more burden sharing from our allies. We want to sell them F-35s made here in the United States. We want their pilots to get trained. We've worked in my office, along with Senator Bozeman, Congressman Womack, with the Air Force, with the Air National Guard, with the state of Arkansas and the local community in Fort Smith to move this project along very quickly. And everyone has been very responsive, and I think they may have even set records for this. I think things are going well. We've got foreign pilots in Fort Smith flying out of Ebbing every day now. There's going to be more in the months and the years ahead. I just want to make sure that I have your commitment that if something comes up in your lane that requires action, that you'll have the same sense of urgency about this mission that everyone else who has been working with us for years to get the Sound of Freedom back into the River Valley and get more F-35s trained and deployed to our allies have shown for years.
Yes, Senator, if confirmed, you have my commitment, and I'm also very proud of the role that the Installation Mission Support Center and Air Force Civil Engineering Center played in getting this and maintaining this important project on track.
Great, thank you.